Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I had left my car at the small trailhead outside Cedar Hollow around 9 in the morning. The air was damp, the kind of heavy humidity that made your shirt stick to your back, and a thick fog hung low between the pines. I always liked hiking early in the day, when the forest was quiet before the weekend crowds showed up. My boots crunched against the soft mud as I followed the narrow trail up the ridge, and I was thinking about nothing at all except how nice it was to be alone for a while. It started out normal enough. The birds were calling in the distance, and every now and then I'd catch the glint of sun off a wet leaf. I paused to adjust my pack, and that's when I noticed something odd. There were footprints on the trail ahead of me. I didn't think much of it at first. Other hikers must have gone this way before me, but the prints were unusual. They weren't my size, or any size I recognized. They looked too long, narrow in a way that didn't make sense. I stared at them for a moment, squinting through the fog. The strange part was that they seemed to follow the trail exactly where mine would step. Step for step, the prints aligned with where my boots hit the mud. I shook my head, thinking maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe the trail was worn down in spots that made it look like prints. I told myself to stop imagining things and kept hiking. But then I noticed they didn't just appear ahead of me, they seemed to mirror me exactly. Every time I shifted my weight, there was a faint indentation in the mud where the next print would be, just before I stepped. I stopped, frozen, heart starting to pound. I looked around the trail, thinking maybe someone was hiding, playing a joke, but there was no one, just the fog and the smell of wet pine. I tried to shake it off and moved faster, glancing behind me out of habit. The prints were still there, stretching behind me, following me down the trail like they were being made in real time. I turned my head sharply, half expecting to see someone crouching in the bushes, but again, nothing. I could hear only my own breathing, my boots on the soft mud, and the occasional drip of water from the trees. I kept hiking, every step uneasy. The fog seemed thicker now, clinging to my arms and neck. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more than I realized, and each time the prints were there, exactly aligned, exactly following. I tried to convince myself that it had to be another hiker, one who had moved strangely, maybe barefoot, though that didn't explain the way the footprints matched my steps so precisely. By the time I reached the first clearing, sweat had started to bead on my forehead. I stopped, leaned on my trekking poles, and tried to look around the clearing. The fog hung low, almost rolling along the ground in faint waves, but the clearing itself was empty. The footprints ended there. I bent down to examine them more closely. They looked real enough, pressed into the mud, dark from moisture, but there was something about them that felt wrong. They didn't really belong in this world, if that makes sense. Too precise, too deliberate. I shook my head and started heading back. Maybe I'd been imagining it, maybe the fog had played tricks with shadows and light. The trail back was quiet, the same fog wrapping around everything. But then I noticed my own footprints on the way back were there. But something wasn't right. There were no strange prints behind me. None. Only mine. That alone was enough to make my stomach tighten. I kept walking, trying not to look at the mud too closely, trying to tell myself I'd seen what I'd seen and it didn't matter. When I got to the trailhead, I froze. My boots were exactly where I had left them when I parked my car hours ago. Clean, dry, as if I'd never walked the trail at all. My car keys were in my pocket, but the feeling in my stomach tightened. My backpack, my trekking poles, even my jacket, all of it looked untouched, as if I had never moved from that spot. I checked the mud near the trailhead. No footprints leading back into the woods. None. Nothing disturbed. The trailhead itself looked exactly like it had that morning, before I had started my hike. I thought maybe someone had played a cruel trick, but the forest was isolated. No other cars were parked there. No one was around. I even called out a few times, just in case, and the fog muffled my voice before it disappeared into the trees. I drove home in a daze, half expecting the road to vanish under me. Every bump in the pavement felt unreal. The house was quiet, and I dropped my pack in the living room, ran my hands over it, over my boots, over my jacket. Everything felt normal, but the memory of those prints, the way they had mirrored me step for step, made me dizzy. I tried to eat dinner, tried to watch some TV, tried to ignore it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I dreamed of the trail, my boots walking through the mud, and just behind me, invisible eyes or something keeping pace. I woke sweating, the sheets twisted around me. My boots were by the door, exactly where I had left them after coming home. My hands shook as I touched them. I could feel the memory of the mud of the trail still clinging to me, though physically nothing had happened. The next morning, I went back. I wanted to see the trail again to confirm that it hadn't just been a hallucination. The fog was lighter now, and the forest smelled normal, fresh. I followed the trail to the same clearing. There were no strange footprints anywhere, not a single one. The mud was smooth, as if it had never been disturbed. My own prints from the day before had vanished entirely. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some animal had made strange impressions. Maybe it was an optical illusion. Maybe the forest had swallowed them overnight. But nothing explained how the prints had mirrored me so perfectly, or why my boots appeared to have never left the trailhead at all. I didn't go back after that. I started hiking different trails during the day where I could see everything clearly. But sometimes, late at night, I picture that fog and the trail, and those prints following me step for step. I can't explain it. I can't remember exactly when the trail ended or when I stopped being followed. I've told a few friends about it, cautiously. Most shrug it off, joke about weird dreams or exhaustion. I can't argue with them. I don't even know if I want to know what really happened. All I know is that for a few hours in that foggy forest, I was not alone. Something, or someone, kept perfect pace with me, unseen, and when it was done, it left no trace. Not in the mud, not in the trailhead, not even in my memory, except for the pieces that feel like a warning. I still hike. I still like being in the forest, but I make sure the sun is up and I'm not alone if I can help it. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can still feel the weight of those invisible footsteps right behind me, keeping time, waiting. I woke to my alarm blaring at 3 a.m., which was weird enough because I always set it for 6. I reached over blindly, smacking the snooze button, and froze. There was a voice, low and almost crawling over the digital beeps. It said, "We need more time." Not my imagination. I've never heard anything like it before. The room was dark, quiet aside from the alarm and the voice. I strained to hear anything else, but the house was unnervingly still. No hum from the fridge, no creak from the floors, not even the usual wind brushing against the siding. I sat up, heart hammering, trying to convince myself it was a recording glitch or a prank. My apartment is on the second floor of an older building, so no one could have reached me without me noticing. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and peeked through the blinds. The street outside was completely empty. Normally, at least one car passes at that hour, or a neighbor shuffles to their car or driveway. Nothing. The streetlights cast harsh circles of light on the asphalt, but it was empty and silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I wrapped myself in a blanket and tried to tell myself it was a dream. The voice didn't repeat, and my alarm was now just beeping normally. I took a deep breath and checked my phone. 3:02 a.m. The clock had actually changed. I remember glancing at it before going to bed. I'm meticulous about alarms. Something had shifted the time, or I didn't want to think about it. I got up, cautious, and walked to the window. I live on a quiet street in a small suburban area just outside Portland. Usually there's distant traffic, but this night was completely mute. I kept staring, and then I noticed the first strange thing. The neighbors' houses all looked untouched, but there were shadows, too straight and tall to be natural, stretching across lawns. They didn't belong to trees or streetlights. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. When I looked again, they were gone. I stepped back from the window, feeling that tightening in my chest. My apartment has been secure for years. Locks, alarms, everything. Nothing should have felt off. But then I noticed the second odd thing. My bathroom mirror fogged, even though I hadn't showered. Tiny droplets formed streaks, as if something had been breathing on it from the other side. I rubbed the glass. It left smudges, but when I turned, the bathroom door was closed just as I'd left it. I decided to get dressed. I wanted to check outside, maybe walk down the street, see if anyone else had noticed. I opened my front door carefully. The hallway was cold and still, no draft, no sound of anything beyond. The stairwell smelled faintly of ozone, like after a thunderstorm, even though the weather had been clear all day. I stepped outside barefoot. The pavement was wet, but there hadn't been rain. My eyes adjusted, and I noticed something I hadn't before. The lawns, the street, the parked cars. They looked subtly different, like a layer of frost, but warmer than frost should feel. When I touched a car door, the metal was lukewarm, not cold, and there were no fingerprints or scratches. It was unnervingly pristine. I started walking, taking slow steps down the street. My phone was in my hand, flashlight mode on. No one was around, and the deeper I walked, the more I noticed that sound had disappeared entirely. No birds, no wind rustling leaves, not even the distant hum of traffic. Everything was sealed in this heavy, suspended silence. I reached the end of the street near the small park and saw something that made me stop completely. In the park, the grass was flattened in a circular pattern, like a perfect landing pad. In the center, the ground was slightly scorched, not burnt, more like sterilized. I knelt, brushing my fingers over the grass. The texture was off, like it had been pressed and then reheated to the perfect shape. I swear I felt it vibrate faintly under my fingertips. Then the hum started. Not loud, but low, resonating in my chest. It rose and fell like breathing. My flashlight flickered. I looked up and saw lights hovering above the trees. 3 of them, circular, bright, but not sharp like street lamps. Soft, diffuse, moving slowly. I blinked and they shifted, positioning themselves directly over the park circle. I wanted to scream, but my throat had gone dry. I ran back toward my apartment, feeling the air pulse around me, and when I turned the corner to my street, the lights had vanished. The circle in the park remained, but the air was silent again, as if nothing had happened. I got inside and locked the door. My phone was dead when I checked it. It had been full of battery a few minutes ago. I charged it and waited for sunrise, not daring to sleep. When morning came, everything seemed normal. My alarm had reset itself to 6 a.m. like always. The park looked ordinary, no circle in the grass, no scorched earth, no strange residue. I tried talking about it to friends later. They laughed it off, blamed stress or a vivid dream. But I know what I heard, what I saw. That voice, the lights, the circle. They weren't my imagination. The weirdest part? My bed was slightly warmer than it should have been, like someone had sat there briefly. The following nights, I set my alarm for 3 a.m., but it never went off again. The street returned to its normal, quiet suburban routine, with distant cars and dog barks filling the background. But I keep noticing small oddities. Objects shifted slightly on my desk, shadows that don't match the light, a faint hum in the walls at night. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, sure I heard that same voice whispering, "We need more time." I don't know who or what was there that night. I don't know why it chose me, or why everything outside seemed paused, perfect, and silent. I only know that when I look at my alarm clock or step outside just before dawn, I feel watched, and I remember the circle, the lights, and that whisper. It's patient, waiting, and I can't shake the certainty that it will return. I try to live normally, but some nights I leave a window cracked just a little, the curtains loose, hoping I'll catch a glimpse of it. I haven't yet, but I still hear it sometimes, barely, in the hum of the house, reminding me that time isn't always what it seems, and that whatever it is, it's not done with me. I woke up to the key lying on my nightstand again, exactly where it always showed up now, next to my phone, just out of reach. It wasn't there when I went to bed, I was sure of it. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I had bought it or left it there myself, but I couldn't. The metal was cold and smooth, a standard brass key, nothing fancy, no markings except faint scratches that looked eerily like my own fingerprints. I'd never touched it before, at least not that I could remember. I lived alone in a small townhouse on the edge of Ashwood, a neighborhood that felt empty after dark. It had rained earlier, and the air smelled like wet asphalt. I reached for the key once, hesitated, then set it down. Something about it didn't feel right. My phone alarm buzzed, breaking the tension. This wasn't the first time it happened. It had started about a week ago. Every morning, I'd wake up and the key would be on the nightstand. Sometimes the scratches would be more pronounced, as if someone had pressed it in and out of their fingers deliberately. I tried to tell myself I was leaving it there subconsciously, that maybe I had a spare door key I didn't remember using. But I checked all my locks, my drawers, my closet. Nothing matched this key. It didn't fit any of my doors. The first night I noticed it, I had assumed it was a prank. Maybe my friend Liam thought it would be funny. I texted him the next day, dude, the key is back. What the hell? No response. I didn't press it. That was stupid, of course, because no one else could have entered my bedroom without leaving some sign, and my door was always locked. After a few nights, I started noticing other things. Tiny scratches on the hardwood floor like something had been dragged across it. Sometimes faint smells. Ozone, like electricity or a metallic tang. I chalked it up to stress. Work had been insane. My shifts at the lab stretching late. The rain tapping against the windows while I tried to fall asleep. But the key, the scratches, the smells, they kept repeating. One night, I decided to stay awake. I had set up a small lamp on the nightstand, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was leaving the key. I sat in bed, pretending to sleep, my eyes half closed. Around 2:14 a.m., I saw it, a shadow moving in the corner of the room, pale and featureless like a smear of light. I froze. My breath caught. The shadow didn't walk, it glided, and when it reached the nightstand, the key was there. It dropped it down gently, almost like placing it, and then the shadow was gone. The clock didn't move. No noise, no hum, nothing. I waited until sunrise before I dared to move. I checked the footage from my security camera aimed at the bedroom door, but the recording only showed static, then a single frame of the room, empty, time-stamped 3 minutes earlier than it should have been. I tried to call someone, anyone, but no one could explain it. My phone worked fine, and no one had been in the house. The next night, the key reappeared again. I examined the scratches more closely this time, using a magnifying glass. They weren't random. They followed the curves of my fingerprints exactly. That meant either I had done it without knowing, or something had copied me perfectly. The idea of someone or something watching me, knowing me that intimately, made my skin crawl. I started leaving notes, little post-its next to the key. Who are you? Stop leaving this here. I see you. I woke up each morning expecting an answer. Nothing. The key just sat there, the same scratches, no change. A few nights later, I was reading in bed when the lights dimmed. Not a flicker, but the whole room seemed to dim evenly. The air got colder and the metallic smell returned, stronger this time. The key lifted slightly off the nightstand, hovered for a second, and then slid toward the edge, stopping as if it had hit an invisible hand. I reached for it. My fingers brushed the metal, and a strange tingling shot up my arm. Not painful, just wrong. The room seemed to hum quietly, vibrating against my chest. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The key was back on the nightstand. I tried to leave the house, drive somewhere, escape, but it was like the key anchored me in place. No matter what I did, I returned to the townhouse. Sometimes I would wake in the kitchen with the key on the counter, as if I had carried it there in my sleep. Other times, it was in the bathroom, on the edge of the sink. My memory of these movements was blank. I kept a journal, writing down everything, the dates, times, weather, the smells, the scratches, the sensations. I began to notice patterns. The key never appeared during the day, always after midnight, always when the house was silent, and the scratches seemed to deepen after nights when I didn't wake up to see it. One night, I had a dream, or maybe a memory. I can't tell the difference. I was floating above my own body, the room below me dark except for the key glowing faintly on the nightstand. A figure stood in the corner, tall and thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its face was blank. It reached toward the key, and my body obeyed, though I was only watching. When it picked up the key, I felt a pressure in my chest, a sense that I had no choice. I woke up sweating, the key on the nightstand, scratches more pronounced than ever. I tried ignoring it. I locked the key in a box, put it in a drawer, taped the drawer shut. I left for work the next morning, thinking maybe a little distance would help. When I returned that night, the drawer was open. The key sat on top of it, scratches faintly visible in the dim light. I began leaving cameras in the room every night, hoping to capture it. Motion sensors, infrared, audio, nothing. The footage would either be corrupted, silent, or show the room empty. Yet the key always appeared, always with those faint, impossible scratches. I talked to a locksmith once, casually, about the key. "Looks normal," he said. "Brass, standard cut, nothing unusual." I asked if a key could copy fingerprints. He looked at me like I was insane. No, not possible. And yet there they were. I don't know what it means. I don't know why the key is here, why it knows me, why it's always coming back. Sometimes I hear faint whispers at night, so low I can barely make them out, just the hiss of air over metal, maybe words, maybe nothing. "Don't fight them," I think I hear. Or maybe I'm imagining it. I've thought about leaving, moving across the country, but the key always comes back. It's like it knows where I am, where I sleep, how I move. And when I wake, it's always there, resting on the nightstand, waiting, scratches perfect, untouched by human hands. So now I live with it. I set up more cameras, more sensors, I write everything down. I check the key every night, study the scratches, wonder if I'm being watched, if I'm being measured. Every night I fall asleep with the key beside me, knowing it will be there when I wake, knowing that I will never understand how or why or who is leaving it. I was sitting in my boat, anchored just off the shore of Crescent Bay, staring at the water under the moonlight. The air was thick with humidity, and the smell of salt and wet wood clung to everything. I'd been fishing there for years, always alone, always at night, but that night was different. Around midnight, the water went still in a way I've never seen before, like it had been frozen, and then I noticed the glow. It was beneath the surface, a pale, almost white light, spreading outward in rippling circles. At first I thought it might be a reflection from the pier lights, but the pier was dark, no one was around. The glow pulsed gently at first, then faster, like it was breathing. I leaned over the side of the boat, squinting to see what could be making it. My line was forgotten, bobbing in the water. I dropped a hand into the water, almost instinctively, and the glow shifted. It seemed to follow my fingers, rippling beneath the surface. I pulled my hand back quickly, heart pounding. I'd fished in these waters my whole life, seen things moving beneath the waves, fish, currents, bioluminescence, but nothing like this. It was wrong. Too steady, too bright, too alive. I picked up my flashlight and shone it across the water, but the light barely reached the surface, and the glow seemed unaffected. I started moving the boat toward it, just a few meters at first, keeping the motor low. That's when it got brighter, then steady, almost burning, and my head spun with a sudden nausea. My vision blurred, and the air in my lungs felt thick, like breathing underwater. The last thing I remember clearly before it hit me was the water pulling at the boat. Not a current, not a wave, but a gentle, insistent force. I reached for the edge to steady myself, and everything went black. I woke with a start, chest pressed against the wood of my boat. Dawn was just breaking. Mist hung low over the bay, and the water was calm. Normal. The glow was gone, the boat still in the same spot, but something felt off. I looked down at my hands and arms. They were dry. My line had drifted slightly, but there were no tracks from the motor in the sand along the shore. The boat was where I'd left it last night, but the sand didn't show any sign that I'd ever left it. I climbed out onto the shore, heart still hammering, scanning the bay. Nothing. No lights, no footprints, no signs of anyone else being there. My equipment was exactly as I had left it, the water around me quiet and normal. I tried to piece together the time. I'd been out there for hours before, right? But the sun was just coming up, and my watch showed exactly the time I had gone out the night before. Nothing in between. I walked down the beach, trying to remember. Had I fallen asleep, drifted in a current, and been returned? But my memory of the glow was too vivid for that. I could still see it beneath the water, pulsing, alive. My stomach churned, and I felt a weight pressing on my chest, like the water itself was watching me, waiting. I didn't tell anyone at first. The town was small, and people already called me crazy for fishing alone at night. I didn't need them thinking I'd lost my mind completely, but I kept noticing strange things. Small, subtle ones at first. My line tangled in ways I didn't leave it. The boat slightly shifted when I returned from errands. The sand near the shore smoothed out like nothing had touched it. The next night, I went back. I couldn't help it. Part of me needed to see if it would happen again. I anchored at the same spot, the moon thin and pale, and waited. Hours passed, nothing. Just the usual rustle of water, the occasional bird calling in the distance. I started to convince myself I had imagined it all, that last night had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Then the glow returned. Faint at first, near the boat, and then brighter, spreading beneath the surface. I froze, holding my breath. The water wasn't moving, but the light pulsed again, slow and deliberate. I reached for the edge, and the same nausea hit me, a spinning, pulling pressure in my chest. The boat shifted slightly, and the glow intensified, almost blinding. I wanted to turn back to grab the motor and leave, but my body refused. It was like something had its hand on my spine, keeping me anchored. I remember thinking, just don't fight it, and then everything went black again. When I woke, the sun was up. The air smelled like morning, like wet wood and sand, and the water was calm. The boat was exactly where I had left it the night before, the line still floating. My hands were dry. My watch showed only a few minutes had passed, but the sun and the sky said hours. I checked the sand along the shore. No tracks, no sign of anyone touching the boat, nothing disturbed. I got home, shaking, and slept through the day, unable to make sense of anything. Friends called to check on me, and I lied, saying I'd stayed out late, fallen asleep in the boat. They believed me, of course. They had no way of knowing. But I knew something had happened, something I couldn't explain. After that, I stopped going out at night. I tried fishing during the day, kept my boat tied up, left the glow behind. But I noticed little things that unsettled me. Tiny scratches on the deck, spots of water where none should be, and sometimes faint ripples across the bay when the wind was calm, always in the spot where the glow had appeared. Weeks passed. I tried to ignore it, convince myself that whatever it was had left. And then one evening, I went down to the shore to check the boat. The water was still, no wind, no birds. And I saw it, just a faint shimmer beneath the surface, pale and steady. I didn't move, didn't touch anything. I just stared until the sun disappeared behind the clouds, then went back home. I haven't been back out at night since. I don't plan to, but sometimes when I'm washing the boat or looking at the bay from my porch, I swear I can see a glow beneath the water, just for a second, like it's waiting. And I remember the pull, the blackout, the absence of time, and the feeling that the water isn't just water. It's something else, something alive, something aware. I can't explain it. I can't rationalize it. And I don't think I want to. I know what I saw, and I know what it did to me. The rest is a gap I can't fill. A night that never existed except for what I remember, and the faint certainty that whatever it was, it's still there, waiting under the water at Crescent Bay. I got home from work late that Thursday, the sky over Portland a dull gray with drizzle slicking the streets. The neighborhood was quiet, nothing out of the ordinary, the kind of evening where you feel like the whole world is paused. I walked to my mailbox, keys in hand, ready to toss the bills and junk into the recycling bin. But when I opened it, I froze. There were maybe 20 letters stuffed inside, all handwritten in my own cursive. My handwriting, definitely mine. I picked one up. The postmark was for a date 3 weeks from now. I blinked, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank. My name was on the envelope, the same exact style I'd use if I'd written it myself. I turned it over, slowly sliding the flap open. The letter started with my name, Anna, and then it described my evening from last night, down to the exact details I had no memory of. How I poured myself a glass of water at 9:47 p.m., how I absent-mindedly tapped my foot on the carpet while watching a rerun of a show I don't even like, how I checked the locks 3 times before going to bed. I felt my stomach twist. I remembered none of it. I dropped the letter back in the mailbox, heart hammering. Maybe I'd misplaced a diary, or someone had been keeping notes. But that didn't make sense. The handwriting was exactly mine. I shook my head, told myself it was a weird trick, maybe a prank from a friend with a talent for forgery. But the dates kept catching me. Future dates, some months ahead, some a year from now. I carried the letters inside, setting them on the kitchen counter. I ran cold water over my hands, trying to ground myself, trying to pretend I wasn't losing my mind. I opened another envelope, curious despite the fear curling in my chest. This one described me leaving my apartment at 7:02 a.m., checking my reflection in the elevator mirror, and almost dropping my coffee mug. Details I couldn't possibly know if I hadn't done them, and yet I had zero memory of it. I spent the next hour going through the letters, and a pattern started to emerge. Every letter described actions from the nights before, things I had done in the dark, things I had no conscious recollection of. Sometimes the letters described movements so minor I didn't think anyone would notice, yet they were precise. Sitting on the couch, standing in front of the stove, pacing in the hallway, I decided to set a camera in the living room, one of those motion-detecting security cameras, hoping to catch what was going on. That night, I tried to stay awake, pacing, watching, but I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything unusual on the monitor. At some point, I must have dozed off because the next morning the camera showed a bright flash, a distortion in the footage I couldn't explain, and a timestamp that jumped ahead by almost 3 hours. I had no memory of that time at all. The next batch of letters arrived the following morning. Same deal, my handwriting, future dates. I hesitated before opening them, my hands trembling. One described me leaving my apartment at 2 a.m., walking down the street to the small park nearby, staring at the empty fountain and touching the fountain's edge. I had no recollection of leaving my apartment. I checked the locks again. Nothing was disturbed. My apartment was exactly as I had left it. I thought about calling someone. But who would believe this? The police? Friends? Anyone would think I was either insane or lying. I didn't call anyone. I just kept reading, kept watching, trying to catch a pattern, trying to find a mistake in the letters. There wasn't one. Every detail matched perfectly with the subtle changes I noticed around my apartment each morning. Milk left out, the window slightly ajar, my phone not on the charger. One night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the letters spread around me like a weird, twisted board game. The clock read 1:33 a.m., and I started noticing a faint light pulsing through the blinds. I didn't see it outside, but the room glowed in sharp intervals like it was coming from above. I tried to convince myself it was a reflection from the streetlights, but the pattern was too rhythmic, too precise. My heart was thumping. I grabbed the letters that described the night I was awake now. One in particular predicted exactly what was happening. The light will appear in the living room, pulse softly, and Anna will feel a tingling along her arms. She will not scream or resist. My arms were already tingling, low, strange, like pins pricking beneath my skin. I froze. I remember a sudden weightlessness, like being pulled upward without being lifted. The letters had said nothing about movement, but I felt it, a slow, unnatural levitation toward the ceiling. The light pulsed stronger, warming my skin but not burning. I could see the edges of the room warp, stretch, as if gravity itself was bending. My pulse raced, but I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't move. The letters had been precise, but nothing could have prepared me for the physical sensation, the surreal, creeping, alien logic of it. The next thing I remember, I was back on the couch, letters scattered around me. The clock read 4:18 a.m., but the sun was barely peeking over the horizon. I had no memory of the 3 hours in between. My arms tingled with faint red marks in a grid pattern, small, neat, geometric, like I had pressed my hands against some kind of stencil. I checked the letters. One had a postmark of the previous night's date, and when I opened it, it described exactly what had just happened. The levitation, the tingling, the marks. I tried to leave the apartment the next morning. I wanted normal, wanted to drive somewhere, anything to escape the sense of being monitored. But the letters kept arriving, slipping into the mailbox as if no time had passed. The next letter described me taking a shower at 10:07 a.m., brushing my hair in the mirror, getting dressed. I hadn't done any of that yet, and I could feel the edges of my sanity fraying. I began documenting everything. The letters, the times, the tiny changes in my apartment. Each letter arrived exactly as predicted, every one of them showing me moments of my own life I couldn't recall. I've tried sleeping in different rooms, leaving the apartment doors open, even staying at friends' houses. Nothing stops them. The letters always find their way. I don't understand what's happening. I don't know who or what is sending them, or why my own handwriting is used. I don't know how someone could predict actions I have no memory of performing. Sometimes late at night, I hear the faintest whisper, almost like a voice carried on the wind, Anna. But when I go to the window, there's nothing. I live my life in the small routines I can control. I've stopped trusting my memory entirely, stopped trusting what I see or feel. The letters have changed my perception of time, of myself. Every morning, I check my mailbox with dread, every envelope a small, sharp reminder that I am not fully in control. And yet, I still have to live. I make coffee, go to work, pay the bills, I smile at strangers, I carry on. But the letters are always there, waiting, predicting, recording. I can't fight it, and I don't know what will happen if I try. All I know is that one night, it will be more than letters, and I'll have no idea what part of my life belongs to me anymore. I was driving home on Route 47, the kind of narrow, two-lane road that cuts through cornfields and woods for miles. It was late, maybe 11:30, and the fog was rolling in low, hugging the asphalt and the tree line. My headlights barely pierced it, and the world outside the car felt muted, unreal. I had left work late. Traffic was gone, and the only sound was the old engine humming and the occasional rustle of something in the fields. Then I heard it, a whisper. Faint, like the wind through the leaves, but sharp enough to make me tense. Jason, it said. I froze, gripping the wheel tighter. My name. Out here, no one else on the road, nobody within miles. I shook my head, probably my imagination. Maybe an animal brushing against the roadside trees. Then it came again, clearer. Jason. This time I could almost pick out multiple voices, overlapping, echoing through the fog. My chest tightened. I slowed the car, squinting through the windshield. The trees were still, no movement. The corn swayed slightly, but nothing more. I put the car in park and stepped out, thinking maybe a prankster or someone walking home. The fog wrapped around me, wet on my skin, muffling every sound except that whispering. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded strange in the heavy air. No reply. The whispering stopped as abruptly as it had started. I laughed nervously, trying to shake it off, and went back to the car. As soon as I shut the door, the whispering started again, but now inside the car. I nearly jumped. The voices were all around me, coming from the vents, the dash, the speakers. Jason, Jason. They weren't loud, more like a thread of sound pressing against my eardrums. I twisted in my seat, checking the windows, the glove box, the back seat. Empty. Nothing. I started the car again, hoping movement would break whatever was happening. As I drove slowly down the foggy road, I realized the whispers weren't following me. They were tied to the car. No matter how fast I went, the voices kept up, soft, insistent. Jason. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a car stereo interference, a trick of the fog, some strange acoustics bouncing my own voice back at me. I mumbled my name, listened, and for a moment the voices paused, then returned, overlapping and distorted, almost pleading. It made my stomach turn. I noticed the road stretching ahead, fog rolling in thick curtains, the cornfields dark and silent. The streetlight that marked the next curve flickered and went out. I slowed even more, unease pressing in. The voices changed, a new pattern, almost like they were forming words I couldn't quite parse, syllables twisting and echoing unnaturally. I reached for my phone. No signal. Not surprising out here, but now it felt sinister. I dialed my wife, thinking if I could hear her voice it would anchor me. The line rang once and went dead. Then, through the speaker, I heard it. Not her, not exactly, but a distorted version, whispering, "Jason." The tone was urgent, desperate, almost like a warning. I hung up, hands shaking. I pulled over, breathing hard, trying to figure out what to do. The fog seemed to thicken around the car, hugging it, pressing against the windows. I opened the door a little to look outside. The voices faded for a moment, replaced by a low hum I couldn't place, vibrating in my chest. Then I caught a glimpse of something beyond the fog, a shape, tall, thin, standing at the edge of the cornfield. I blinked, and it was gone. No movement, nothing disturbed. I started the car again, driving cautiously, headlights barely cutting through the mist. Then the whispering returned, but louder this time, urgent, overlapping my own thoughts, like the voices were inside my head as well as the car. I reached to roll down the window, hoping to let in outside air, but nothing changed. At some point, I realized I couldn't remember how long I'd been driving. The fog thickened, curling around the car, distorting the trees, the road, the sky. My sense of direction slipped. I glanced at the odometer. It had jumped miles ahead, numbers spinning before settling. I was somewhere unfamiliar, yet I knew it was the same road. Impossible. The voices started a new rhythm, a chant almost, interspersed with my name. I tried covering my ears, chanting back, anything to break the cycle. My vision felt off, like I was moving through water, the fog shifting unnaturally. Then the car jolted, like hitting a pothole, but I hadn't. The hum intensified, vibrating through the frame of the vehicle. I blinked and the fog cleared, suddenly crisp and normal. The road stretched ahead, quiet, no whispering, no hum. The cornfields were still, the air warm, summer night as it should have been. I slowed, taking in the surroundings. Nothing was out of place, yet my mind screamed that something had happened, something that couldn't be explained. I pulled into the driveway at home, breathing hard, hands gripping the wheel. Everything seemed normal. The porch light on, the car in the driveway, the house silent. I sat there a long time, trying to convince myself I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had dozed off, maybe the stress and fog had conjured hallucinations. But I couldn't explain the odometer, the distortion of time, the exact whispers repeating my name. I went inside, checked the locks, looked at every room. Empty, normal. I went to bed, tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard a faint whisper, so soft I questioned it, coming from the corner of the room. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. Nothing. The next day, I drove the same road in daylight. Nothing unusual, just fields, trees, and the regular rural stretch. I marked the area in my mind, thinking maybe I'd avoid it, hoping it was a one-time thing. But a part of me knew it wasn't random. Something had been out there, something aware. Something that could reach inside my car, my head, and call me by name. I've driven the route several times since, alone and with others, and the fog never returned, the voices never came. I tell myself it was a hallucination, a stress-induced event, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it's still there, waiting in the trees, listening for me to drive that lonely road again. Every night when I close my eyes, I swear I hear the faintest whisper of my name, just on the edge of hearing. I woke up shivering, teeth clattering, my breath coming in visible puffs inside the tent. I'm not exaggerating when I say the inside of the tent was coated in frost, thin but solid across the fabric and on the sleeping bag where I had been lying. The zipper handle had a layer of ice, and when I reached for my water bottle, it was frozen solid. I rubbed my arms, muttering to myself, trying to convince my brain this was a dream or some freak midsummer frost phenomenon. I was in July. I had triple-checked the calendar the night before. July. I fumbled for my watch. It was a cheap digital thing, nothing fancy, but it always kept accurate time. The display read 12:17 a.m. I frowned. I remembered crawling into the tent around 11:45 p.m., at most, maybe an hour of sleep. That should have been fine, right? Except the watch indicated I'd only been unconscious for 15 minutes. 15 minutes. I shook my head. My stomach twisted. That was impossible. I had the memory of falling asleep, the cool night air, the distant sound of crickets. I remembered the weight of my sleeping bag and the way the ground beneath me felt hard but familiar. 15 minutes didn't match any of that. I unzipped the tent cautiously. The air hit me like a wall, dry and freezing. My boots were half buried in a thin crust of frost. I glanced around the campsite. The small clearing where I'd set up my tent was covered in a light dusting of snow and ice. The surrounding trees were rimed with frost along the branches, and the puddle I had been using to rinse my gear was frozen solid. It didn't make sense. I live in Michigan. This wasn't unusual in February. But July? Midsummer? The sun had set maybe an hour before, and it had been a normal warm evening. I had felt the humidity clinging to my skin when I hiked in. I walked a few steps outside the tent, crunching the frost under my boots. The whole area was undisturbed, like no one had walked through it, but it was coated in ice. Every twig, every patch of moss. I tried to rationalize. Maybe I had passed out, hallucinated, or some freak weather pattern had moved in incredibly fast. I scanned the sky. No clouds. The stars were out, normal summer constellations, nothing obscured. Not a single gust of wind. I noticed the smell first. There was a faint metallic scent in the air, almost like ozone. I pinched my nose and looked back at the tent. The frost shimmered slightly, like it was catching light differently than normal ice. I knelt down, touched it. My fingers stuck for a second, then I pulled back. It wasn't melting. I touched the patch of moss near the tent. It was cold as ice. Not dew cold, not damp cold, but frozen solid. I stepped back and tried to reconstruct what had happened. I remembered hiking to the clearing, setting up the tent, making a small fire, roasting a couple of marshmallows. Then I had crawled inside, zipped the door, and settled in. I could recall the details of brushing off leaves and the way the nylon crinkled under my hands. Then, nothing. I checked my watch again. 15 minutes had passed. I squinted at the numbers. I pressed the buttons. Time kept moving normally from that point, but it didn't retroactively explain the missing hour or so. I tried to see if the frost had an origin point, if maybe a pocket of cold air had come through, but everything was uniform. No vent, no frozen stream, nothing that could explain it. I backed up slowly, scanning the tree line. Shadows stretched oddly in the moonlight. The air vibrated faintly, almost like a hum beneath the frost. Just enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself it was the cold, my nerves. Maybe it was, but there was a weight to it, a subtle pressure in my chest, like the forest itself had noticed me. I remembered the sound first, a faint whirring, low and rhythmic, barely audible at first. I froze. It came from above. I glanced up at the stars. At first I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. Nothing moved, no branches swayed, no rustle of animals. The hum intensified, almost imperceptibly, and then it stopped abruptly. I noticed a faint glow in the air just beyond the tree line, soft and diffuse, like someone had suspended a lantern in the fog. But there was no fog. It was shimmering, pulsating slightly. I wanted to call out, to scream, but my throat felt tight. The glow shifted, just slightly, and then I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. The forest was silent again, the frost still solid around my boots. I told myself to move, to leave. I packed up the tent quickly, boots crunching over frozen moss, my gloves sticking to the frost. Every sound seemed muted, and every shadow felt heavy. I tried to retrace my steps from earlier, but the path seemed subtly wrong. Trees and rocks shifted slightly from where I remembered them. After what felt like hours, but was probably 10 minutes, I made it back to the trailhead where I had parked my car. The gravel crunch under my feet was normal, and the night smelled like summer again, humid and alive. My watch, now ticking normally, said 12:45 a.m., about 30 minutes after I had woken in the tent, though in reality I had no memory of traveling the half-mile trail in the ice. I drove home slowly, gripping the steering wheel tightly, glancing at the forest in the rearview mirror. Nothing followed. No strange lights, no glow, no hum. Just the regular hum of the engine and the ordinary world returning around me. I turned off at my driveway and parked, staring at the house. Everything seemed normal, except my hands were still cold and numb, my skin tingling in a way that felt unnatural. Inside, I checked my watch again. Time had marched forward, as it should, but the gap remained. 15 minutes of sleep, an hour of missing experience, frost and ice in midsummer. I ran warm water over my hands and rubbed them, watching steam curl into the air. My bedroom smelled normal, the house quiet, everything as it had been before the trip. I haven't gone back to that campsite. I've thought about it constantly since then. Every clear night, I look at the stars, wondering if whatever happened above that clearing was still out there, waiting. I can't explain it. I can't rationalize it. And I still wake sometimes, sweating, convinced I can hear a faint hum, feel the chill of frost that shouldn't exist in July, and wonder if I was gone for more than 15 minutes. Or if I wasn't gone at all, just somewhere else entirely. I woke up blinking into bright sunlight, my head pounding like I'd hit it on the steering wheel. The smell of wet grass and dirt filled the car. My seatbelt was still fastened, the engine off, and the windows rolled up. I didn't recognize where I was. No houses, no street signs, just a wide field with the remnants of morning fog curling along the low hills. My hands were on the wheel, keys still in the ignition, and my phone in the passenger seat. The screen said 8:13 a.m. I had no memory of leaving home. The first thing I noticed was how silent it was. Not a bird, not a dog, no distant cars. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own heartbeat feel deafening. I rubbed my temples, trying to pull my thoughts together, and that's when I noticed the van. It wasn't there. I had been seeing it for a week, the same unmarked white van following me every night. Always a little behind, like always turning the same corners I did, never flashing lights, never stopping. I thought maybe it was coincidence, maybe my paranoia after a long stretch of night shifts, but now there was no van, and that was worse. I tried calling my friend Laura just to say something, anything, and my phone rang once before a crackling voice came through. It wasn't hers. It was low, monotone, like it was speaking through layers of static. Don't move. Wait. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time. My rational brain argued, maybe someone had hacked the line, maybe it was a prank. But my gut screamed otherwise. I climbed out of the car, careful not to step in the dew-heavy grass, and looked around. There were faint tire tracks in the mud, but they weren't my own. They led in a single line straight into the field, then vanished. I followed them a few paces, feeling the chill of uncertainty crawl over me. The field felt wrong, like it had no depth, no real edges, just space that went on and on. I stopped, suddenly aware of a subtle humming sound. Low, almost inaudible, but vibrating through the soles of my shoes, up my legs. I stumbled back to the car, trying to get a grip on reality. My chest was tight. My mind kept snapping between logical explanations. Exhaustion, sleepwalking, stress. But every time I looked around, the fog seemed to twist differently, the edges of the hills bending slightly in ways that made no sense. That's when I noticed the scratches. On the roof of my car, faint but visible, like something had dragged across the metal while I wasn't looking. I reached up to touch them, and a jolt of static ran down my arm. The hair on my neck stood up, and for a moment I swore I saw the air above the field ripple, like heat waves on pavement, only colder, thinner, almost like a screen bending. I forced myself to take a breath. "Okay, Ethan," I said aloud. I had been alone, yes, and nothing like this had happened before. I needed to think. I tried to check my phone again, GPS, anything. It turned on, battery nearly full, but the map showed nothing but blank space. No roads, no buildings, just field. I remembered the van, always watching, always silent. I had tried ignoring it, tried changing routes, but it had been there every night. And now, it wasn't. It had been a week, 7 nights, the van following me, but never close enough to approach. And somehow, now I was here, in this field, no memory of leaving home. I tried to retrace my route back in my head. I remembered leaving the driveway, heading west, headlights cutting through early morning fog. The rest was blank. Nothing until this. My hands tightened on the wheel. I saw a shimmer again, this time in the air above the tracks. It wasn't wind, it wasn't heat, just the space above the mud curling in a shape that didn't make sense. And then I realized the humming was louder, and I could feel it more clearly, vibrating through the car itself. I tried the door. Locked. The key in the ignition didn't work. The car refused to move. My heart sped up, chest tight. Then a soft, almost imperceptible thud on the roof. I froze, staring. Nothing outside, nothing visible, but the sound was repeated, 3 soft taps, rhythmic, deliberate. I whispered, "Who's there?" And the taps stopped. The field remained empty. I wanted to move, to run, to drive, but the car wouldn't start. My rational mind argued sleep deprivation, but I knew better. My instincts screamed something was here, something I couldn't see. Then my phone buzzed, vibration against the seat. I picked it up and the screen flashed a photo. It was me, sitting in the driver's seat, wide-eyed, staring at the dashboard. Only, it was different. My pupils were too large, my skin slightly gray in the photo. I dropped the phone, fumbling for the door handle, but the keys still didn't turn the ignition. The air above the field shimmered again, stronger this time. I swore I saw shapes, thin, elongated, moving quickly in ways that didn't seem natural. Not quite human, not quite mechanical. My body froze, but my mind screamed to leave. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? Time felt broken. Then, abruptly, the key turned. The engine roared to life. I didn't question it. I shifted into drive, my hands shaking, and drove straight, following instincts rather than memory. The field stretched endlessly, then the trees returned, then roads, then familiar landmarks. I pulled into my driveway, heart hammering. The sun was fully up, nothing seemed changed at home. Laura called later. I tried to explain, but no words fit. I still see the van. I still feel the humming sometimes at night, faint beneath the floorboards or through the walls. And I can't explain the time I don't remember, the field I can't locate on any map, or the shapes in the air above it. Some nights, I look at my car keys, still in my hand, and wonder what I did while I wasn't aware. What followed me. And if it's waiting just out there for the next time I drive home alone. I was on the roof of my apartment building again, the small aluminum ladder groaning under my weight, pulling my telescope into position. The air was thick with humidity. It had rained earlier, and the city smelled like wet asphalt and electricity. I had a ritual most nights, even when the clouds were heavy. Check Sirius, Orion, and my favorite, Cassiopeia. I liked knowing the constellations, the way they stayed the same while everything else changed. I'd been adjusting the telescope for a while, tightening the screws, squinting through the finder, when I noticed Cassiopeia didn't look right. The familiar W wasn't there, not a single star. My first thought was clouds. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but the sky was clear above, nothing blocking the view. I scanned around. Other constellations were normal, stars blinking in their usual rhythm, but the patch where Cassiopeia should have been was blank. I reached out to adjust the focus, and that's when I saw it. The space where the stars should have been blinked out completely. Just a black rectangle in the sky, edges too clean, as if someone had cut it out with a knife. My hands shook and I laughed nervously. Maybe it was a trick of the optics, a reflection. I tapped the lens and refocused. Same thing. I remember saying aloud, "Okay, that's new." My voice sounded small in the wet, empty rooftop space. I pulled back and tried to get my bearings. The city was quiet for a Friday night. Damp air seems to swallow sound, but something felt heavier than quiet. The hairs on my arms were standing up. I had the distinct feeling I wasn't alone, though I couldn't see anyone. I leaned over the telescope again, trying to convince myself it was just a technical error. I checked my phone for the time, 1:47 a.m., and texted my friend Mira, who's more into astronomy than anyone I know. No reply, of course, not that late. I remember thinking how ridiculous it was. Mira's gonna laugh at me in the morning. I don't know how long I sat there, just watching the blacked out patch of sky. Maybe 15 minutes, maybe half an hour. The air felt wrong, like it was denser around me, vibrating faintly against my skin. And then the humming started. Barely audible at first, low in frequency, almost like a refrigerator motor far away, but definitely there. I froze. I glanced around, convinced someone had climbed up the ladder, but the roof was empty. No footprints in the puddles, nothing moved. The humming grew louder, or maybe my ears just tuned to it. It seemed to come from the black spot itself, or at least the direction my telescope was pointing. I remember dropping my hands onto the telescope tube. It was vibrating now, faintly, in rhythm with the hum. And that's when the sky blinked. Just a quick, sharp flash, and the city below seemed to shimmer. I thought I'd imagined it. My stomach tightened. The next thing I remember, I was on my back on the roof, my head resting against the cool metal of the fire escape ladder. My telescope was positioned differently, pointed straight up, rigidly, as if someone had grabbed it and set it there. I sat up, disoriented. The time on my phone was 4:03 a.m. My jaw ached from biting it. I had no memory of moving, of being awake during those hours. I looked up and my stomach dropped. The patch of sky above the telescope, where Cassiopeia should have been, was empty. Not just blank, but utterly devoid of stars. The edges weren't sharp anymore, just black, like a hole had been pressed into the universe. Other constellations were still visible, but that section of sky was impossible. I climbed down carefully, shaking, trying to rationalize everything. Maybe a rare atmospheric phenomenon? Satellite interference? My rational brain ran through possibilities, none of which fit. Back inside my apartment, I checked the timestamps on photos I'd taken earlier that night. The last one was 1:52 a.m., Cassiopeia clearly visible. The next photo was 4:05 a.m., the sky utterly black where it should have been, telescope pointed straight up. Nothing in between. My memory was a void for more than 2 hours. I tried calling Mira again. No answer. I paced around the apartment. The humming followed me, faint now, almost a vibration in the floorboards. I touched the telescope and it seemed to pulse under my fingers. Tiny, rhythmic. I thought about reporting it, posting online, even calling someone at the university's astronomy department. But how do you explain a constellation disappearing, 2 hours of missing memory, and a humming that has no source? That night and the next few, I avoided the telescope. I kept the blinds drawn, watched other stars through the window. Cassiopeia reappeared the following night, exactly where it should have been. Normal. But I knew what I'd seen. I felt it in my bones. The emptiness, the hum, the missing time. I don't know what happened those hours. I've replayed it over and over, trying to stitch together something tangible, but there's only the black patch, the vibration, and the memory gap. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that hum again, faint through the walls. And I look at the telescope, the way it tilts slightly off-center, and I wonder if it will happen again. I've avoided going to the roof alone since then, but the curiosity gnaws at me. I can't explain it, and maybe I never will. All I know is what I felt, the weight of something unseen, the pull of the sky, and the certainty that for a brief, terrifying moment, the universe blinked, and I blinked with it. I woke to a silence that felt wrong. Not the usual forest quiet where you can still hear the creek trickle or the wind move through the pines, but a deep, pressed down kind of quiet. No birds, no squirrels, not even the faint hum of insects. I blinked against the gray dawn and tried to orient myself. My tent flap was open and the mist hung low between the trees, everything slick with overnight rain. My pack was still where I left it, but my sleeping bag was twisted around me in a way that suggested I hadn't curled up like normal. I shook my head, rubbed my eyes, and tried to shake off the weird feeling crawling over my skin. I reached for my compass to make sure I hadn't overshot the trailhead in the dark. The needle spun in frantic circles, ignoring north entirely. I frowned, dropped it, and picked it back up. Same thing. My stomach tightened. I had hiked solo this weekend to clear my head, not to get lost in some strange magnetic anomaly, but the compass had never done anything like this before. I started walking, hoping to find a familiar marker or trail sign, but the forest had changed. The underbrush looked the same, but the spacing of the trees felt off, like someone had rearranged the trunks overnight, subtle enough that it was almost unnoticeable, but enough to make me doubt my memory. After 20 minutes of walking, I checked my watch. It was 6:42 a.m. I thought I'd only been awake a few minutes, but my legs were damp and stiff, like I'd been moving for hours. Confused, I shook it off and kept going, trying to find the trail. Then I heard it. Or rather, I didn't. The silence was heavier than before, pressing in from all directions. Normally, even on a still morning, you hear the rustle of leaves, the chirp of a bird, or the scuttle of a small animal. Nothing. I stopped, looked around. My own breathing felt too loud. I whispered my name out loud, Ethan, and the sound seemed to vanish immediately, absorbed by the still air. I decided to turn on my phone for GPS just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. The screen flickered, then the battery icon blinked red, even though it had been fully charged last night. I shook it, pressed the buttons, and finally, a signal popped up. Except the map showed a straight patch of forest, no trail, no river, nothing recognizable. I tried retracing my steps back to the campsite, but everything looked the same. I could have sworn I'd walked toward the rising sun, but now the mist made it impossible to tell direction. I muttered curses under my breath, frustration mixing with panic. I felt like I was being watched, though I couldn't see anyone or anything. I stopped at a small clearing and leaned on my knees. The mud sucked at my boots as I tried to think. My mind felt foggy, like something was pressing against it from the inside. Then I noticed the dew on the ground around me. 3 footprints, perfectly round, spaced evenly, walking in a circle around where I'd stopped. I froze. They weren't mine. I tried to call for help, dialing the ranger station, but my phone didn't ring. Instead, I heard a low hum, faint at first, then stronger, vibrating through my chest. It wasn't mechanical. It had no source, just there, everywhere. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. The next thing I knew, the hum stopped. My compass lay on the ground, needles still spinning. I picked it up again. This time it pointed steadily north, but when I looked around, nothing matched what I remembered of the trail. I took a deep breath and tried walking anyway, hoping to find the path. After what felt like a few minutes, I came to a familiar tree, a twisted oak I'd used as a landmark last year. Relief hit me, and I started following the trail markers I remembered. But then I checked my watch again. It was 9:56 a.m. I couldn't explain it. I had no memory of walking for 3 hours, yet my legs were sore and my clothes were soaked with dew. I stopped at a bend and leaned against a tree, trying to piece it together. Everything looked normal now, the way the light hit the ferns, the sound of a distant creek, but something was off. My pack had shifted, straps twisted in ways I couldn't have done myself. My compass was back to normal, but my sense of direction felt wrong, like my instincts had been reset. I started jogging, heading toward the trailhead, desperate for something familiar. Birds had returned now, cautious at first, then louder as I moved. The wind picked up slightly, rustling leaves like nothing had happened. I kept expecting the hum, the spinning compass, something to snap me back into that other state, but nothing came. When I finally broke through the last stand of pines, the parking lot came into view. My car was there, untouched, and the engine started on the first try. I leaned back in the seat, trying to make sense of it. The memory gap was frightening. I could recall packing my bag, setting up camp, and then nothing until I woke on the trail hours later. I drove home slowly, glancing at the trees and the roadside, half expecting to see something follow me. My skin crawled with every shadow that moved against the dawn. At home, I locked the doors and sat on the couch, trying to write down everything I remembered. Even now, days later, I notice small things that don't make sense. My socks were damp and dirty, but I don't remember stepping in mud. My boots had scuffs I don't recall getting. And sometimes at night, I hear a faint hum through the walls. Not loud enough to pinpoint, but enough to make my chest tighten. I've hiked that forest dozens of times, and I've never seen anything like it. I try to tell myself it was disorientation, stress, or sleepwalking, but the footprints, the compass, the time gap, they don't fit. I keep thinking about the silence, how the forest stopped entirely, and how I wasn't alone in that quiet. I haven't gone back yet. Part of me wants to prove it was all in my head. But another part knows that the forest is different now, and that whatever it was that made everything stop isn't done with me. I keep my compass on the nightstand, spinning or not, just to remind myself to watch, just in case. And I keep thinking about those 3 hours I can't remember, about the footprints, about the way my mind went blank like someone else had borrowed it. I don't know what happened, and I may never understand, but I know the forest remembers, and I think it'll be waiting if I go back. I woke up on the porch just as the first hints of dawn were bleeding over the pines. The air was cool, damp with last night's rain, and the smell of wet earth mixed with cedar hit me all at once. I sat up slowly, head pounding and stomach turning, trying to remember how I got there. My legs were tangled in the doormat, my jacket was twisted around me, and in the gray light, I noticed a scrap of paper stuck to my forearm with a smear of what looked like dried sap or something sticky. I peeled it off carefully and stared at it. The handwriting was mine. Well, it looked exactly like mine, loopy, uneven, as if I'd scribbled it in a rush. The words made my chest seize. Don't fight them next time. I swallowed hard and shook my head. My porch was quiet except for the occasional drip from the roof gutter. Nothing seemed out of place. I tried to remember what had happened the night before, but everything was patchy, like torn bits of film. Leaving the hardware store after picking up some rope and nails for a project, stopping at the gas station, the neon buzzing too bright and too loud. And then, nothing. I got up slowly, shivering, and rubbed at my eyes. My truck was in the driveway, keys in the ignition, but the engine was cold. I hadn't driven home. I remembered walking, maybe? Or had I been carried? My mind felt thick, like wading through syrup. I went inside, trying to find something normal. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee from the morning before. On the counter, my phone was charging. The screen lit up when I grabbed it, 3:17 a.m., flashing across it in bright blue digits. That couldn't be right. I could have sworn I'd gone to bed after midnight. I checked my call log and messages. Everything from the previous evening was gone. Except for one thing, a recording file labeled Voice Memo 1. I tapped it, and my own voice came through, uneven, whispering, "Don't fight them next time." Not just saying it, it sounded like it was pressed directly into my ear, distorted, hollow, but unmistakably mine. I froze, holding the phone as the hairs on my arms stood up. I tried to tell myself it was sleepwalking, some trick my brain had played. But then I noticed the scratches on my forearm, small, shallow, almost like pinpricks in a pattern I didn't recognize. They weren't there yesterday. I went to the kitchen and poured some coffee, hands shaking. I turned on the radio. Static at first, then a low hum, then a whisper underneath, almost conversational, overlapping with the DJ's voice. I couldn't make out what it said, just one word repeating in rhythm with the static. Next. I spent the morning trying to rationalize. Maybe someone had broken in, maybe I'd blacked out, like maybe it was a prank. But everything was exactly where I'd left it, nothing stolen, no signs of forced entry. And the piece of paper, I hadn't written it. At least, not consciously. The afternoon passed in a daze. I tried going for a walk to clear my head. The streets were quiet, no one around, even though it was still early for a Saturday. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes your skin sticky and your chest feel tight. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone or something to be there. That night I stayed inside. The lights were on in every room. I made myself eat dinner, but couldn't touch the coffee. Around 11, I heard a sound from outside, soft, almost like a rustling in the bushes. I froze, straining to hear. The sound was deliberate, rhythmic, almost like steps, but no shoes, no crunching leaves. Just movement, smooth and controlled. I peered through the blinds. Nothing, only shadows stretched across the porch in the lamplight. I shook my head and laughed nervously, telling myself I was imagining things. Around 2 a.m. I woke to a faint glow through the blinds. Outside in the driveway, there was a light hovering above the ground. Pale blue, soft at first, but intense enough to cast my truck's shadow sharply against the garage door. It wasn't moving like a flashlight. It was floating, perfectly still. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself I was dreaming. When I looked again, the light was closer, almost directly over the porch. I could feel heat from it even through the glass, though it wasn't a warm light. There was a pressure in my chest, like the air itself was denser, harder to breathe. I backed away, but my feet felt heavy, sluggish. Then a sound, low and almost musical, like a hum vibrating through the floor, through my bones. It was soft but unmistakable. The kind of sound that makes your stomach twist and your hair stand on end at the same time. I don't remember walking outside, but I was on the porch in seconds, standing under the glow. The light pulsed gently, and I felt weightless. Not like I was flying, but like the ground wasn't holding me down entirely. I wanted to run. My body wanted to fight, to step away, but I couldn't. Then, faintly at first, a voice. It wasn't words exactly, more like a thought pressed into my mind, clear and chilling. Don't fight. Next time. Everything went white for a moment. I felt myself lifted, not violently, but effortlessly, as though gravity had lost interest in me. I could hear my own breathing in my ears, loud and ragged, but my body didn't feel like mine. I woke on the porch hours later, the paper stuck to my arm, sun barely creeping through the trees. Nothing else had changed. No footprints in the yard, no signs of anything landing, no evidence of what had happened. My phone had powered down and turned back on, the memo still there, the writing on the paper fresh. I've tried to explain it to friends. They joke about sleepwalking, stress, too much coffee. I can't convince anyone. I've checked myself for injuries. Everything else is normal, except me. I feel off. Like a part of me isn't fully here, like a memory is missing. I keep the paper in a drawer now, folded carefully, not wanting to throw it away, not wanting to touch it too much. I don't leave the porch light off at night anymore. I avoid the driveway, the yard, the woods beyond. I still hear the hum sometimes, low, distant, like a door left open somewhere. I feel the pressure in my chest when it comes, and I know it's them. I don't know why, or what they want, or how I came back so easily when others might not. But the paper haunts me. Every night, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't listened, if I had fought. I keep thinking about going outside, about trying to face it, figure it out, but I never do. I don't want to test the warning. I just live with it. I just wait, and I try not to think about what next time might mean. I was brushing my teeth when I first noticed it. Nothing dramatic, just standing there in front of the mirror, half awake, watching myself go through the motions like I always did before work. I wasn't even really looking closely, just zoning out the way you do sometimes. But then, I caught it. My reflection blinked, and I didn't. At first, I thought I just missed my own blink, that maybe I'd closed my eyes without realizing. But the timing was wrong. I'd been staring straight ahead, eyes open, toothpaste foaming in my mouth. Then the face in the mirror closed its eyes, slow and deliberate, and opened them again. My body didn't move. I spit into the sink and leaned forward, squinting at the glass. My reflection stared back. Same messy bun, same gray t-shirt, same dark circles under the eyes. Everything looked normal. I shook my head and muttered to myself, blaming it on being tired. I'd been pulling double shifts at the pharmacy back, and it was catching up to me. I finished up, rinsed, turned off the light, and went to bed. That night, I dreamed about being in the bathroom again, only it wasn't quite the same bathroom. The layout was right, but the lighting was off, like the bulbs were flickering. And the mirror was huge, bigger than it should have been, stretching from the sink all the way up to the ceiling. I remember standing in front of it and realizing my reflection wasn't moving. It just stood there, staring. Then it raised a hand slowly and pressed it against the glass, palm flat. When I tried to back away, I couldn't. My feet wouldn't move. I woke up sweaty and tangled in my sheets, my chest heaving. The next morning, I avoided looking at the mirror for a while. I washed my face at the kitchen sink and did my makeup with my phone camera. I laughed at myself for being ridiculous, but still, I couldn't bring myself to go back in there until I absolutely had to. When I finally did, nothing happened. Everything was fine. I figured it really had just been my brain playing tricks on me. But later that week, it happened again. I was flossing this time, not even looking directly into the mirror, when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I stopped and stared straight ahead. My reflection's mouth was moving a fraction of a second behind mine, just barely delayed. It was subtle. So subtle I thought maybe I was imagining it, but the more I watched, the more certain I became. I dropped the floss and turned away, heart pounding. The weirdest part came the next night. I'd gone to bed late, scrolling on my phone until I couldn't keep my eyes open. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up and realized the bathroom light was on. That made no sense, because I always shut it off. Always. I got up, patted across the carpet, and peeked in. The light was blazing, the mirror catching the glow. And there were smudges on it. Handprints. Dozens of them, like someone had pressed their palms and fingers against the inside of the glass. I froze in the doorway. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but the prints weren't on the outside. They were behind the glass somehow, trapped in there. They were streaked and uneven, like whoever left them had been pushing hard. I shut the door and backed into the bedroom, my heart racing so loud I thought I'd wake the whole block. I grabbed my phone and nearly called the police, but what was I supposed to say? That my mirror was haunted? That my reflection was out of sync? Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and waited until the sun came up. When I finally worked up the courage to check again, the prints were gone. The mirror looked spotless. I started avoiding the bathroom altogether after that. I showered at the gym, used the restroom at work, and brushed my teeth over the kitchen sink again. But you can't avoid your own house forever. One night, I came home late and really had to use the bathroom. I told myself I'd just go in, do what I needed to do, and get out without looking at the mirror. I kept my head down the whole time. As I was leaving, though, something caught my eye. Not the reflection. The mirror itself. It looked deeper than it should have been. Like, instead of bouncing my image back at me, it was showing a space, a room, maybe. I don't know how to describe it. I could almost see movement in there, shapes shifting just out of view. I slammed the door shut and didn't open it again for 2 days. When I finally did, everything was normal again. Too normal. No smudges, no flicker, no sense of depth. I stared at myself for a long time, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. My reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. My face was blank, lips pressed together. But in the mirror, my mouth curled upward slowly, teeth showing. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the bath mat. I didn't even turn off the light. I just bolted. That night, I slept in the living room with every lamp on. The next morning, I went into the bathroom and found water pooled on the floor under the sink. The pipes weren't leaking. The faucet wasn't dripping. It looked like the water had come from the mirror itself, running down the glass and dripping onto the tile. I cleaned it up with a towel, hands shaking. I couldn't explain it. I didn't even want to try. Since then, it hasn't stopped completely, but it hasn't escalated either. Sometimes the reflection is fine, sometimes it lags. Sometimes I wake up to find the light on when I know I turned it off. I don't know what's worse, when something happens or when nothing does. I don't use that mirror anymore unless I absolutely have to. I keep the door shut, and some nights I even shove a chair against it, like that would make a difference. But even now, when I walk past the hallway, I swear I catch glimpses of movement through the crack under the door, like someone pacing inside. I woke up to the sound of silence, or at least the kind of silence that feels different from normal quiet. It wasn't the absence of noise exactly. It was a pressure, like the house had been pressed into some thick, still air. I rolled over, squinting at the glow of the alarm clock on the nightstand, and it was stuck on 2:03 a.m. I frowned, reached over, unplugged it, and shook it a little. Nothing. The time didn't change. At first, I thought maybe a power surge had fried the clocks. I had 2 wall clocks in the living room, a digital timer on the oven, even my phone, and every single one was frozen at 2:03. I grabbed my phone anyway. Nothing. Screen lit, battery fine, but the time didn't move. My stomach turned over a little. I looked out the window. The street lights were on, the faint orange glow behind the trees like it should be normal, but something felt off. I slipped on some slippers and stepped outside. The air was thick, humid, a little sticky. I walked to the end of the driveway, and the neighborhood was quiet, too still. The leaves on the trees didn't move. A dog that normally barked somewhere a few houses down was absolutely silent. I shouted just to hear something back, but my voice didn't seem to carry. It sounded like it did, but the sound didn't bounce, didn't echo, like it existed in its own bubble. I walked further, across the street, stepping onto the sidewalk. Everything was frozen. Cars in driveways looked normal, but there were no little movements, no flickers. I waved my hand in front of a street lamp, and the light didn't catch on it like it should. It was eerie in a way that didn't make sense. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through syrup, but the pavement was smooth. I tried my phone again. Still 2:03. I tapped the screen, turned it over in my hands, tried calling out anything, but the world stayed in this weird paused state. Birds should have been chirping, a breeze should have stirred the trees, even the distant hum of a refrigerator. Nothing. I walked down the block, just looking, trying to see if maybe this was some kind of hallucination. The moon was visible behind thin clouds, and for a second I thought I saw a faint shimmer on the horizon, like heat waves bending the air, but it didn't make sense for a summer night like this. I rubbed my eyes, blinked, and it didn't go away. Then I noticed the shadows. Everything had shadows like it should, but they didn't change with me moving. My own shadow stretched along the sidewalk, but the moment I moved, it didn't shift like normal. It stayed put, anchored to the pavement. I felt a cold prickling in my neck, like someone or something was watching from just beyond my field of vision. I turned quickly. Nothing. I walked a little further down the street, reaching the corner where the woods began behind the houses. I had no reason to go there, but my legs moved without thought. The air there was thicker, colder. I could see the tree line clearly, though normally it would be darker. The shimmer from before was stronger now, a faint glow, almost white, hovering behind the trees. It didn't pulse, didn't move like a firefly. It just hovered. I blinked, trying to focus. And when I opened my eyes again, everything had moved. The streetlights flickered, the leaves rustled, a car down the street hummed past. I checked my watch. 5:04 a.m., 3 hours gone. I had no memory of walking, no memory of anything between stepping outside and that moment. I stumbled back home, heart hammering, mind spinning. Everything inside looked exactly as I had left it. The clocks running normally again. The alarm clock ticked over to 2:04, but my phone was correct. I checked the bedroom, the living room, even the kitchen. No signs of anything unusual. No footprints in the grass from where I walked, nothing disturbed. For the next few days, I couldn't shake it. I kept checking the clocks, counting seconds, trying to see if I could notice any lag, any pause. Nothing. Friends told me it sounded like a weird dream, maybe sleepwalking, but I was too conscious of what was happening to be asleep. I remembered every step of waking up, unplugging clocks, walking outside, except for the 3 hours in between. I drove past the woods that night just to see if I could find the shimmer again. Nothing. The trees looked normal, the air normal. I even spent the next week walking the street late at night, hoping for a repeat, but the world moved normally, like always. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had blacked out without realizing it. Maybe some unknown environmental factor had caused sensory hallucinations. But I still can't explain how my legs carried me down the block without conscious thought. How the world appeared paused, how shadows refused to move. I sleep with the blinds closed now, and I avoid stepping outside at night if I can help it. I've driven past the woods in daylight, and even then, there's a nagging sense of the shimmer, like it's always there just beyond perception. My clocks have never stopped again. My life has continued as normal, but I feel like a part of time stayed behind that night, in that frozen 3 hours, waiting for me to remember it. I don't know if it was alien or some strange phenomenon of the earth I can't comprehend, but I remember it. I remember the pause. I remember stepping into a world that wasn't mine and coming back 3 hours later with nothing to show for it. And sometimes, when I glance at a clock late at night, I feel a tick in the back of my mind, a faint memory of a time that stopped, and I can't tell whether it's real or if I just imagined it. But I know I felt it. The 3 hours are gone, and yet they're not. The pause exists in some corner of my memory, some part of the night that I never really walked through, that I never really lived. And I still feel, just sometimes, that if I blink at the wrong moment, I'll find it again. I had set up camp in a small clearing off the ridge, my tent nestled between two pines and overlooking the valley below. It was late July, and the air was warm but dry, the kind of heat that makes the dark feel heavy and close. I was alone, just me, my pack, and the faint rustle of leaves. I'd hiked this trail plenty of times before, but the solitude that night felt different, more intense, like the forest was holding its breath with me. I'd finished cooking dinner, eaten quietly, and settled into my tent with a book. Around 10, I noticed the hum. At first, I thought it was distant traffic, maybe the hum of a generator from some unseen cabin. But the ridge was remote, no road, no power lines. The sound was low and steady, vibrating somewhere beneath my ribs. It didn't come from the trees or the valley, it seemed to come from the sky itself. I zipped up the tent and listened. The hum stayed. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired and that maybe it was my own heart or some odd resonance in the rocks. I fell asleep eventually, or at least I thought I did. I woke to light hitting the tent, soft but clear, like dawn. But there was no morning chill, just the same heavy warmth of the night. The first thing I noticed was silence. The hum was gone. Birds weren't singing, the leaves weren't moving. Even the air felt heavier than it should have been. My watch read 4:58 a.m., which didn't make sense. I'd only fallen asleep around 10, and there was no way I'd slept 8 hours in one stretch. I remembered closing the tent, hearing the hum, lying there. I unzipped the flap and everything looked the same, yet wrong. The clearing was identical, the same arrangement of stones and pine needles, but my tent was different. It was packed neatly, the stakes pulled tight, the rainfly tucked inside as if someone else had done it for me. My backpack was closed, shoes lined up perfectly outside. I didn't remember moving, didn't remember packing anything. My stomach tightened. I stepped out, heart hammering. The forest was still quiet. Not a rustle, not a bird, not even the soft whisper of wind. I checked the perimeter of the clearing, but there were no footprints, no signs of another person, just the soft impression of my own boots from the evening. My compass was spinning. Every direction pointed somewhere new, no north, no south, just rotation, dizzying and disorienting. I tried to recall the night. I remembered the hum, the warmth, the slight fear I'd pushed aside. Nothing after that. No sound of sleep, no dreams, no moments passing. It was like a gap had been carved out of time. I called my name, unsure why. My voice sounded normal at first, then warped, stretched almost like it was underwater, bouncing back at me distorted. The hairs on my arms stood up. I packed my tent slowly, forcing my hands to do what they remembered, not what my mind recalled. The forest still didn't wake. The sun, though rising, didn't cast shadows properly. It just seemed bright, washing over everything like a misted lens. I hiked down the ridge, avoiding the small paths where I thought someone or something might have left a trace. There was nothing. No signs of passage, no disturbance. It was as if I'd been plucked out of reality and put back where I belonged without leaving a mark. I reached my car hours later. My phone buzzed. Messages from friends, normal mundane stuff. I checked the photos I'd taken before dark. All of them were there. The ridge, the valley, the trees. But there was one image I didn't remember taking. It was of my tent from above, perfectly centered in the clearing, like someone had hovered a camera high above it. The timestamp was 2:30 in the morning. I didn't remember leaving the tent. I didn't remember taking the picture. I drove back slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror as if expecting to see something trailing. Nothing. The hum didn't return, not on the road, not in the car, not once I was home. My apartment was normal, but I couldn't shake the memory of the warmth, the silence, the ordered tent, or the spinning compass. I tried to research similar experiences. Missing time, alien abduction, time lapses in the forest. But nothing matched exactly. Nothing explained the hum or the meticulous packing. I've returned to the ridge since during the day, trying to retrace the night. The forest is normal, birds singing, wind stirring the needles. I don't know if I want to go back at night. I tell people I lost track of time, maybe dozed off outside the tent, but it doesn't account for the neat packing, the compass, or the image on my phone. Sometimes, when it's quiet at night in my apartment, I swear I can hear a low hum, faint at first, just beyond hearing. It's the same tone, the same vibration I felt that night. My stomach tightens, my hair pricks. I look around, half expecting the air to feel thicker, expecting the world to pause. But it doesn't. I'm here, my tent is packed, my boots are dry, my hands and mind steady. And yet, in some corner of that night, some part of me is still out there in the clearing, listening to the hum. I was brushing my teeth around 11:30 p.m., just a normal Tuesday, thinking about bills and work emails when I noticed something off. My reflection in the bathroom mirror didn't move when I raised the toothbrush. I froze mid-swipe, staring. My reflection just stayed there, like a paused video. For a moment, I thought I dozed off standing up, but the toothbrush was still in my hand, dripping toothpaste onto the sink. My reflection didn't blink, didn't move. I swallowed hard and leaned closer. I could see my own eyes in the mirror, staring back at me, but they weren't mimicking my movements. Okay, that's impossible, I muttered. The sound of my own voice made my stomach knot. I moved my hand slowly toward the glass. My reflection didn't follow, and then it smiled. Not a small, polite smile, but a wide, deliberate grin that I had never made. My chest tightened, and I stumbled back a step. The light from the bathroom flickered, just a tiny twitch, nothing major. And when it steadied, the reflection was gone. The mirror was empty, normal, just me staring back at myself. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the toothpaste fumes had gotten to me. I rinsed and splashed water on my face, telling myself to calm down. Maybe I was overworked, maybe it was stress. I laughed nervously and brushed my teeth again. That's when I noticed it. A faint smear on the mirror, like a fingerprint, but higher than I could reach. I wiped it with the back of my hand. It left no mark, as if it hadn't been real. I finished brushing and went to the living room to grab my phone. When I glanced at it, the time said 2:47 a.m., which was impossible. I always check my phone before bed, and I remembered it being closer to 11:45 p.m. An hour and a half had vanished. My phone battery was at 46%, but I had charged it earlier. It shouldn't have dropped that fast. I tried to shake it off and went to the kitchen to pour some water, but the refrigerator door had condensation on the inside, like it had been open, even though I hadn't touched it in hours. I shivered and told myself I was imagining things. I kept glancing over my shoulder. The house was quiet, unnervingly quiet. No hum from the fridge, no ticking from the wall clock, nothing. I went back to the bathroom to grab my towel. The mirror caught my eye again, and for a second I thought I saw something move behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The bathroom door was closed, the hallway empty. My breathing got faster and I backed up, feeling the air thicken in a way I couldn't explain. I decided I needed to check outside. Maybe seeing the street would ground me. I opened the front door and froze. The streetlights were on, but everything else was different. The houses on my street were too clean, the lawns unnaturally even. My neighbor's dog was out, but it was just standing there, frozen mid-step, ears raised. I blinked and it was gone, the street empty. I walked toward my car, hoping to leave and clear my head. The air felt heavy, almost metallic. I looked up and noticed the sky was wrong. Not stars, not clouds, just a diffuse gray-white glow that seemed to hum faintly. I swear I could feel it pressing down on me, making my ears pop. My legs felt like they weighed twice as much, but I kept moving. When I reached my car, the door was cold to the touch. I sat in the driver's seat, doors locked, and tried to start it. The engine turned over normally, but the radio had static, like someone was breathing into it. I grabbed my phone again. The time had changed to 3:05 a.m., but it was dead. Not low battery, dead. I shook it. Nothing. Then I noticed the back seat. There was a scrap of paper, folded. I didn't remember putting it there. I unfolded it. In my own handwriting, shaky and rushed, it said, "Don't fight them next time." My hands shook and I dropped the paper. I checked the back seat. Empty. My apartment keys were on the dashboard, my wallet on the passenger seat, everything normal, but that note had to have been there. And the handwriting, it was mine, but I hadn't written it. I sat there for a long time trying to piece together what had happened. The hum in the air got louder, almost pulsating. I felt the car vibrate slightly under me. The light outside intensified, not from streetlights, but from the sky itself. My vision blurred at the edges. I tried to look away, but I felt pulled toward it, my body resisting. Then nothing. Silence. My car door was open. I was sitting on my porch. The sun was coming up and everything looked normal again. I had keys in my pocket, the note nowhere to be found. My car was in the driveway, just like always. No strange sky, no hum, no shift in the street. I checked my phone. It was 7:16 a.m. and fully charged. I tried to call my boss. Everything was fine. I had no idea how I got home, no memory of leaving the car or the street. But my hands still shook. For the next few days, I kept noticing small things. Objects shifted slightly in my apartment. The bathroom mirror sometimes fogged with patterns I didn't create. A faint hum would echo through the house at night. My reflection, I swear sometimes it doesn't line up perfectly when I move. I've avoided the bathroom late at night since then, but sometimes I can't help myself. I'll glance at the mirror, and for a fraction of a second, it feels like something else is standing there, smiling, waiting. I don't know who or what was in my bathroom that night. I don't know why it left a note, why the time disappeared, why the hum felt like it was pulling me. But I know that something was watching me, testing me, and somehow it had control over what I remembered. Life went on. Work, bills, small routines, but I still wake sometimes, in the middle of the night, and check the mirror, just in case it wants to smile at me again. I've learned to accept that I might never understand. Some nights, I can hear a soft hum in the distance, or I catch the corner of my reflection doing something I didn't, and every time my heart starts pounding because I remember the note, "Don't fight them next time." I've followed the rule so far. I keep my movements slow, my hands open, my eyes forward, because whatever it is, I don't want to test it again. I woke up to the cold light of morning cutting through my blinds, the kind of gray that makes everything feel muted. At first, I thought my little brother had been up and pressed his hands to the window, but the prints were too small and delicate. I rubbed my eyes and leaned closer. They were thin, like someone's fingers had barely touched the glass, trailing downward in a pattern that made me uneasy. I live on the edge of a small town in Vermont. Our backyard is big, sloping, and backs up to a dense patch of woods that I've been warned never to wander alone after dark. I went to the window, squinting against the dim light, and saw the prints continued onto the siding, then toward the edge of the yard. They disappeared at the tree line. I froze, my stomach knotting. There was no one else in the house. My parents were out early for work, and my little brother Jamie was still asleep in the next room. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, debating whether to go outside. The air smelled damp, earthy, faintly metallic, like rain had just soaked the soil. I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under my feet, and shone the light on the yard. At first, nothing. Just wet grass and shadows of trees stretching long and thin. Then I saw them. Tiny depressions in the soil, faint but there. Footprints. Small, narrow, impossibly straight lines heading into the woods. My hand shook on the flashlight. My brain tried to rationalize a stray animal, someone playing a prank. But the prints were so precise, delicate, almost human. And there was something about the rhythm. They weren't just walking. They were deliberate, measured, like each step was calculated. I called out softly, "Hello?" No answer, just a whisper of wind through the pines. I stepped onto the grass, following the prints cautiously. They led to the edge of the woods, and then nothing. The soil ahead was undisturbed, except for a faint circle of flattened leaves that didn't match any natural pattern. I shone the flashlight over it. No sign of movement, no tracks leading deeper. I wanted to turn back, but curiosity pushed me forward a few feet into the trees. The forest smelled of wet pine and moss. My flashlight caught glimmers of spider webs, wet leaves, and the occasional fallen branch. Then something made me stop. A sound, soft, high-pitched, like a vibration in the air, almost humming. I couldn't tell if it was coming from the trees or inside my head. I spun around. Nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The prints hadn't reappeared, but the circle of flattened leaves seemed wrong. It looked pressed from the inside out, as if someone had knelt there carefully. I shined my light around, and for a moment I thought I saw movement. A shimmer, like heat over pavement, but the air was cold. My stomach sank. I turned back toward the yard. That's when I noticed the first real impossibility. My porch light, always left on overnight, was off. I was certain I had flipped it before going to bed. My flashlight shook as I held it higher. Behind me, among the trees, the shadows didn't match the branches. One shadow stretched taller than the tallest pine, thin, unnaturally straight, tilting slightly as if observing me. I backed up quickly, tripping over a root, and the shadow didn't move like a person would. It just stayed there, looming. My brain screamed, telling me to run. I didn't. I just froze, staring, trying to tell myself it was a trick of the morning light, fog clinging low between the trees. Then the humming rose, low and vibrating like a tuning fork pressed against my ribs. The air in front of me seemed to ripple. I blinked, and for a moment I swear the forest bent warped like I was looking through thick water. The shadow was gone, but the circle of flattened leaves had a new mark. Tiny grooves like scratches leading toward me, toward the yard. I ran, heart hammering, flashlight bouncing in my hand. When I reached the porch, I slammed the door and locked it, leaning against it, gasping. Jamie stirred in the next room. I told him to stay in bed, not wanting to explain what I'd seen. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Did you get up early? Coffee's on the counter." I didn't answer. I just sat in the kitchen, staring out the window at the woods. The fingerprints weren't visible from inside, but the hum lingered faintly, like it had seeped into the walls. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every sound outside, the creak of a branch, a distant crow, the wind, made me jump. By morning, the prints on the window were gone. The small depressions in the grass had disappeared. The circle of flattened leaves, normal again. The forest looked untouched, ordinary. I told no one. My parents wouldn't have understood, and Jamie would have laughed it off. But the next night I checked the window again, and faint marks had returned. Not identical, but close, thin, delicate. I pressed my palm against the glass, trying to compare them to mine. They didn't match. I started noticing other things, small and strange. Objects in my room slightly shifted. My backpack sometimes ended up on the chair instead of the floor. My alarm clock, always at 6:30, blinked different numbers, like it had reset itself. Sometimes when I lay in bed, I could hear that hum again, barely audible, vibrating through the walls. I tried to catch a glimpse outside at night using the porch light. Nothing. The forest stayed still, but the feeling of being watched, of being observed, never left. Sometimes I thought I saw flashes, white, smooth, fast, moving between the trees. No shape, no sound, just a flicker. One evening, I followed the prints again. They appeared starting from the window, leading into the yard, then toward the forest. I hesitated at the edge, thinking back to the shimmer, the hum, the impossible shadow. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight. I wanted to run, to stop noticing, but I needed to understand. I stepped forward a few feet, and nothing. The forest was normal, but when I turned back, the footprints were gone, and on the porch, etched into the wooden railing, were tiny scratches, like someone had leaned on it from the outside. I haven't gone back into the woods at night since. I keep a flashlight by my bed and check the window before sleeping. The fingerprints reappear every few nights, always small, thin, deliberate. The hum comes and goes. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement among the trees, or a flicker of light so fast it disappears if I blink. I don't know who or what it is. I don't know why it's interested in me. But I feel it, watching, waiting, patient. And every time I look out that window, I remember the prints leading into the woods and vanishing halfway through the trees. I live with the question now. Every day, when it comes back, will it be just footprints, or will it want more? I got home that night later than usual. The street was quiet, damp from a drizzle that had let up only minutes before. My headlights lit up the driveway, and at first, everything looked normal. I stepped inside, dropped my bag on the hall table, and froze. The living room was off. Not totally wrong, but subtle enough to make me pause. The armchair that usually angled toward the TV was shifted toward the window. My coffee table wasn't quite centered anymore, and the faintest smell of something burnt lingered in the air, like someone had microwaved food and then left it smoldering. I called out to see if anyone was there. My girlfriend had gone to her mother's for the weekend, but no answer. I shrugged it off as absent-mindedness, the kind of thing I do when I'm stressed. I checked the kitchen, but nothing else looked out of place. The fridge was full, counters clear. I went to bed uneasy, but convinced myself I'd imagined the chair and the smell. The next morning I needed coffee, so I walked to the corner cafe, a 10-minute stroll. The street was quieter than usual, mist curling low along the curbs. Halfway there, I noticed it, a house across the side street that didn't belong. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. It was my house, exactly. Same brick, same windows, same little porch with the same chipped railing I'd been meaning to fix for months. Even the garden gnome by the front steps was identical. I stopped dead, heart beating faster. The cafe vanished into the mist behind me, or maybe I just didn't see it anymore. The air felt heavier, damp clinging to my jacket. I stared at the house, no cars, no movement, no smoke curling from the chimney. I crossed the street cautiously, half expecting the fog to warp around me, and reached the porch. Everything was silent. I touched the doorknob, cold, hard metal, normal. But I didn't open it. My gut told me to back away. I spent the rest of the day jittery. At work, my thoughts kept returning to the duplicate house. Lunch felt surreal. The hum of the office seemed louder somehow, sharper. When I got home that evening, my own house was normal again. The furniture was in the right places, the faint smell of burnt air gone. I didn't mention anything to anyone. The next night, I went to bed early, trying to forget the incident. Around 3 a.m., I woke sweating. A faint orange glow seeped through the blinds. I sat up, listening. No streetlights were on, but the glow flickered across the walls. I went to the window and peered out. Across the street, my duplicate house shimmered in the mist. Not like a reflection, more like it was layered on top of reality. I blinked. It disappeared. I tried to rationalize everything: hallucination, stress, sleep deprivation. But then the subtle signs started. Small things at first. The way the shadows fell differently in my kitchen, a chair slightly off angle, the smell of burnt air when I walked past the living room. I chalked them up to anxiety, but each night it grew. One evening, I returned from work to find the front door unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. Inside, the furniture had shifted again, more dramatically this time. Cushions stacked differently. Books I knew were on the shelf now lined up on the floor. I backed out slowly. My phone buzzed. A text from my girlfriend. "I think something's wrong with your house," she wrote. "What do you mean?" I typed back. She sent a photo. It was my living room, exactly as it had been that morning, but empty of everything else. The photo wasn't taken with her phone. She didn't even know how to get that angle. Over the next few days, I started seeing glimpses of the duplicate house in reflections, in puddles, in store windows, even in the darkened TV screen when I walked past. I could never get closer than the street view. It vanished whenever I tried. It was always empty, perfect, sterile. I tried recording it one night with my camera. When I reviewed the footage, nothing showed up. Not a flicker, not a shadow. It was as if it hadn't existed at all, except in my memory. The strangest thing happened a week later. I returned home from an errand and found the faint smell of burning again. I froze. The furniture hadn't moved yet, but I felt it. The air thickened, heavy, expectant. I stepped onto the porch. Across the side street, the duplicate house sat there, identical and silent, windows dark. I noticed something new, a soft vibration under my feet, almost like the house itself was pulsing. I checked the time. Everything seemed normal. My hands shook. I wanted to knock to see if anyone was there, but I couldn't bring myself to. The mist rolled in, curling around the porch railings, and when it lifted a few moments later, the house was gone. The next day, my neighbor mentioned that someone had been watching the neighborhood. "A man," he said. "Tall, thin, in all black. Just stood there looking at the houses at night." I told him I hadn't seen anyone, but the image stuck in my mind. The duplicate house, the shifting furniture, the smell, the glow, someone or something was involved. I tried to stay rational. I double-checked the locks, installed cameras, made lists of everything I noticed. Nothing showed up. The cameras recorded only the normal yard, normal street, normal houses. No duplicate. It's been months now. The duplicate house appears less frequently, but the subtle signs never stop. Furniture slightly shifted, the faint smell of burning, a shadow that shouldn't be there. I've stopped trying to explain it. I stay alert, always checking reflections, street corners, the mist in the early morning. I don't know what it wants, if it's a warning or a message, or even if it's aware I see it. All I know is that the world I know, the streets, the houses, the furniture, isn't quite mine anymore. Somewhere out there, there's a perfect copy of my life, empty, waiting. And sometimes, when the air hangs heavy and the fog curls just right, I feel it pulsing, reminding me that it's still there. I was a block from our house when I first noticed something off about my shadow. It was late May, that strange bridge time after dusk, when everything looks like someone forgot to finish the day. I had the earbuds in, not paying much attention, walking home from the corner store with a bag of chips and a Gatorade. The whole street smelled like cut grass, and the air conditioner hummed that comes from a dozen houses. My neighbor's porch light, Mr. Hargrove's, was on, which was odd because he always shut the porch lamp at 9. The streetlights had been doing that half flicker they do when a storm is coming, one on, one off, like a bad rowboat. I noticed my shadow because the light made it long and thin on the sidewalk, the way a bad thrift store lamp makes everything look thinner than it is. I lifted my hand to scratch my ear, and my shadow lifted its hand half a second later. For a second, I thought my brain had lagged. I blinked hard, and the shadow matched me. But then I waved both hands and saw the lag again, this time more than a blink. It wasn't lag on my screen or anything. If anything, it felt like the world had a bad connection, like the shadow had to buffer. "Okay, weird," I said out loud, because saying it would make me feel less like my head was messing with me. No one answered. The houses were quiet. The only sound was a lawnmower someone had left running earlier and the low chant of cicadas. I bent down and touched my knee. My shadow didn't move when I did. I snapped my fingers and it jerked, delayed, then flowed back into sync. I stood up and started walking faster, like if I hurried, the problem would resolve. My shadow followed, delayed as before, but the lag got larger. By the time I reached the corner, my legs had been moving for a full second before the dark shape on the pavement mirrored them. The streetlight overhead hummed and a moth tapped its wing against the glass like a tiny narrator. A car went by really slow, a rental with no print on it, and the driver looked like he was aiming his headlights at the houses, not at the road. He didn't slow down for the crosswalk like most people do when they see you. When he passed, his lights painted my lagging shadow like a strobe, and the shape broke into 3 pieces, as if someone had cut it with scissors. The hum in the streetlight got higher, a pitch you didn't hear until you were really quiet. The dog 2 houses down that usually barked at anything moving just lay on the porch and watched us through the railings like an audience. I know how that reads, like a dozen little signs of a neighborhood power hiccup. I know what rationality looks like at 19. Still, moving faster didn't help. The lag stretched to nearly 2 seconds. I took my earbuds out and called for my sister on the phone because calling someone is what you do when you want the world to be normal. The call went straight to voicemail. Her number rang like a bell, and the voicemail cut in with the beep, but the beep sounded a half-second late, like the carrier was auditioning to be a haunted house. By the time I reached our driveway, I had a sludgy feeling in my stomach. The walk had taken 12 minutes, but in my head it stretched like chewing gum. I flicked the porch light with the switch because it felt like doing something would help, and the light came on with a soft pop. My shadow, which had been lengthening toward the street lamp, stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and stayed there, a person-shaped darkness under the yellow pool, waiting. That's the thing about shadows. Up until that night, I never thought of them as things that could wait. They were always obedient, 2-dimensional punctuation. This one looked like someone who'd been told to stay put and had decided to take the job seriously. I moved toward the door, and it felt like a space between me and the house stretched mile long. I should say I ran inside in a normal way, like leaving for a bad movie. What I did was sprint. I grabbed the knob, jammed the door in, and double-locked it without thinking what my hands were doing. That's the honest detail I have. The lock clanking, the bolt sliding, my breath loud in my ears because I'd run all the way home for no sensible reason. From the window by the sink, I could see the sidewalk and the halo of the streetlight. The shadow was still there, like a person who'd forgotten to go home. It hadn't moved from the exact spot where I'd seen it stop. When I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and watched, my chest kept twitching. When I tapped on the glass, the shadow flinched half a second later. The way someone you wake out of a nap flinches against a memory. It didn't look like a figure exactly, no face, no features. But it had posture. It sat or crouched down into a small, patient shape once I blinked, as if folding itself in to wait. I called Mom next, which at that hour was stupid. Her phone went straight to her sleep voicemail, groggy, clipped, and then the message that the network was temporarily unavailable. 2 phones, 2 failures. The TV in the living room was on to make me feel less alone, and the news anchor said the weather would be clear overnight, and the only issue would be dew. I wanted proof. I wanted the world to tell me why a thing that should be a flat bit of sunless ground stayed where it had been told, and then waited like a person. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning with the lights low and the blinds open, a mug of tea gone cold at my elbow. The shadow under the street lamp stayed fixed like punctuation, and every time I peered out, it seemed to choose a slightly different position to rest. Once it seemed taller, once smaller, curled like a child. Once it looked like it had its hands in front of it, thin, parallel smudges that might have been fingers. My eyes were playing tricks. That's what I told myself, over and over, because the alternative was to live in the sense that some other shape could keep its place in the light without anything to cast it. At dawn, the world cleared. The street light went off, and there was a clean spill of gray over the pavement. The shadow, when I looked, had gone. There was no silhouette, no smear to wipe away. When I went out to the sidewalk, there was nothing on the concrete but the dew and the faint shoe prints I'd made the night before when I ran. The grass beyond the curb wasn't flattened. There were no extra prints leading away or toward my house. The only thing that might have proved anything at all was a light streak on the kitchen window, a smear like fingerprints on glass that I could never get totally clean. I scrubbed it until the skin on my palms went soft. I told myself I'd imagined it, or that I'd been too tired or caught up in something I'd read online and wanted to make the world interesting. People do that to themselves all the time. But the way the eyelashes on my left eye had stung for hours after, like a tiny grit had been lying there, made me keep retelling the story in small, private sentences to myself until it felt like the truth. I walked to the corner store later that afternoon, took the long route because my legs still felt wrong. The street light at the corner looked like any other street light. Kids played on the sidewalk, and their shadows, obedient and swift, made the proper shapes as they moved. Mr. Hargrove's porch light was off. The world had gone back to its small business of being ordinary. At noon the next day, my sister called me. We talked about stupid things, a test she had coming up, a text she'd gotten from a friend. Then she asked if I'd been home the night before. I lied and said, yeah, why? She answered like it was nothing. Neighbors were talking. Some kid said there was a kid's shadow out on the sidewalk that wouldn't move. Thought it was prank. She laughed a careful laugh. Creepy how we all see the same silly things. I didn't tell her I'd been the kid. That afternoon, I cleaned the kitchen window again and found a faint print at the corner, like someone had leaned a forehead there to look in. It was nothing anyone else would notice. It was enough for me. I kept the window clean because I wanted to be able to check, and I left a small lamp on that night so the porch light didn't have to do all the work it used to. I walked past that sidewalk every day for a week, and sometimes I would pause and stand in the pool of light where my shadow used to stay, just to feel the normal tug when my legs moved. After that, the neighborhood did its usual things, and the world went on. I never saw the waiting shadow again. Once, months later, I woke and thought I glimpsed the same still shape bending under a different lamp, but it was just a parked car and the way the streetlights slid against it. I want to say I learned something about paying attention, about not taking things for granted. The truest thing I can say is this: something in me kept checking the corner, like you check a door you locked, just in case whatever waits in the light comes back to collect its place. My phone rang at 12:07 a.m. It woke me because I never expected Claire to call that late. She worked nights infrequently, and when she did, I could count on a text or a 5-minute check-in. Seeing her name on the lock screen felt normal and absurd at once. I thumbed it, answered. It sounded like Claire, but it didn't sound like Claire. Her voice, first, tiny and folded over itself, like a bad recording you'd played forward and back at the same time. Then it came through clean for a second. Tom? And the line hiccuped. After a pause, her voice repeated what it had already said, delayed by maybe 2 or 3 seconds, like an echo that arrived a beat late and out of sync. Tom, Tom. She kept saying my name, and every time the word came, it stretched at the end as if someone had pulled on a rubber band. I told myself it was coverage. The roads had been clogged with storms earlier, and I'd heard tales of cell towers hiccuping after lightning. I said, Claire, you okay? And the voice answered, but the answer lagged a little behind my question. My mouth foreshadowed it. She said, delayed. Then after 2 beats, the same voice finished, at the back door, and the 2 syllables didn't line up. For a moment, I stared at the screen like if I watched long enough, the pixels would sort themselves out. I told her to hang on, that I'd be right there. I shut the bedroom door quietly so I wouldn't wake her, and took the cordless from the charger on the nightstand, because it was faster than the stairs, and the house felt wrong in that kind of way your skin recognizes before your brain does. The hallway light was down low. The thermostat read 68. In the kitchen, the clock on the microwave showed 12:09, the seconds bright and steady like they always were when you didn't want them to be. When I pushed the back door open, the yard smelled like ozone and wet grass. There was no one at the sliding glass. The back porch light buzzed, a lazy, nervous glow. The dog, Leo, was on the couch and his head turned, ears pulled forward in that comical way that means both curiosity and caution. He didn't bark. He didn't move toward me. He watched the door as if expecting to see something I'd miss. I called Claire's name, and the sound broke into the night, short, small. For a silly second, I considered going around the house. Then I remembered the voice on the phone had told me she was at the back door. I went to the bedroom on tiptoe because her phone was on the nightstand, and I wanted to see it. The lamp beside the bed was off. The room smelled faintly of her shampoo. There she was, lying on her side like she always did, hair in a messy knot, the blanket pulled up around her shoulders. She breathed slow and regular. Her phone sat on the nightstand with the screen dark and the lock icon still visible. My cordless on the base was still connected. The little light blinked to show a call in progress, and my actual cell in my hand showed the call active. Claire's name at the top, 2 minutes and 10 seconds running. But the phone on the nightstand, flat and inscrutable, was a fraction of a foot away from her hand. I put the cordless back into place and watched Claire breathe. I watched her breath twice because it was the only thing that made sense. I called her again, out loud this time. Claire. Her eyelids shifted. She rolled onto her back and murmured something into the pillow, but didn't wake. Leo sighed in the living room like a person who'd been asked to tense for too long. I went out again to the porch and watched the yard, the trees, slick and black. The streetlight on the far side of the cul-de-sac stuttered for a second and went steady. No one at the back gate, no footprints in the thin mud where the rain had stopped. I called her number from the cordless and listened to it ring against the sleeping house. It went to voicemail, even though my phone had been showing the call as active. On the playback later, there was only the beep and a breath. Not hers, not mine, and then a slash of static. I tried to explain the delay to myself as technical noise, a cell tower loop, an echo in the network. But the voice had said something specific the same way twice, and then held the syllables apart. The words were the same, but they didn't arrive together. And there was that pause when the microwave clock had read 12:09 and my phone said 12:07. Small arithmetic that made no sense. When I took the cordless back to the base, the little light blinked off and the display showed no active call. After a few minutes, the call log on my phone had nothing in it but the missed call alert dated 12:07 a.m. as if I'd let the phone ring and not picked up. My hand, which had been steady, trembled without me noticing. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a mug of coffee gone cold. The house was too quiet, as if someone had removed the room between the walls where the hum lives. At 1:16 in the morning, helpfully, precisely, the upstairs hall clock ticked, and the minutes moved forward with the same obedient patience as they'd had 100 times before. But every so often, when the wind shifted at the trees, I would hear faintly, as if from a closed window, the delayed sound. Claire's voice saying my name in that elastic way. It could have been a dream. I've had vivid dreams before, but the dog would stir and stifle a little, and I would sit up and listen, and the voice would stop. In the morning, Claire made oatmeal in her usual slow way, humming the same absent tune she always sang when she was half asleep. She asked about my night, and I told her the truth. The phone, the voice, the back door. She frowned, patted my hand. "You were up too late," she said. "You always hear things when you're tired." She kissed my forehead, like people kiss the tired, and went back to stirring. I kept replaying the call from the logs. My phone's carrier provided a tiny file for the call record. There was a timestamp, a duration that said 2 minutes and some change. But when I opened the link, the audio player showed a blank curve and then resolved into a flat line. Silence, where my wife's voice had lived. I sat in the office, coffee cold again, and listened to nothing until my ears ached. Later that day, I found a small bruise on Claire's inner forearm. Not purple, just a pale, pale circle that looked like someone had pressed a ring there and then removed it. She laughed it off when I showed her, said probably from bumping into the cabinet. She didn't have any memory of rising in the night. She had no idea why her phone was on the nightstand unless she'd left it by habit. The watch on her wrist ticked along as usual. We asked a neighbor if she'd seen anything odd that night. Mrs. Holloway said she'd heard a car drive down our cul-de-sac sometime after midnight. Lights bright then gone, like a truck passing fast. She had no other information. The street camera at the end of our block, the one the HOA put up last year for petty theft, showed no cars moving after 11. Nothing but a strip of empty asphalt salted with reflected sodium light. I took the footage home and watched the static frame by frame. A stretch of stillness where the road should have been moving. A single blue smear for a blink. No figure. No flash. A week later, Claire called me from the lab late. She was on her way home when her voice came through the headset with a skip, and for an instant, it caught in that same unnatural elasticity, like time itself had a seam. We ended the call, and when she pulled into our driveway, she texted me that her car had run low on gas, and the pump at the station hadn't registered her card, same as the week before when I'd had trouble at Holt's on the highway. We laughed at the coincidence then, but later the laugh felt brittle. Sometimes at night, when Claire breathes beside me and the house is concentrated into the small human sounds, the radiator, the faint hum of the refrigerator, I imagine what I heard stretched across the dark and back again. I imagine the echo is a thing that needs room to move in. I think about the 2 stray seconds between syllables and how that tiny interval made me get up and look and find nothing but her sleeping, her phone dark. I can tell you facts. I answered a call. I heard Claire's voice as if delayed. I checked the bedroom and found her asleep. Her phone was on the nightstand. The call registers as a missed call in the log, and the audio file the carrier gives me is empty. The bruise on Claire's arm fades. The dog is happier when I get up and take him for an extra long walk. We lock the back door twice now, even in the daytime. I don't have an explanation. I have the memory of a voice asking me for something with the timing wrong, as if it had been recorded in another room and played back in ours 2 beats later. I have the way Claire's hair pressed against her pillow and how ordinary she looked when she turned and mumbled, "Not waking." That's where it stops, and the rest is choosing whether to trust that the ordinary is still the ordinary. I do what I can. I check the lock, I check the call log, I sleep with the lamp on from time to time. When it's late and wind rubs the trees just right, I hear my name in the distance and my heart picks up like a dog on scent. I answer every time, because what else do you do when the thing you love calls and the call sounds wrong? It happened at my cousin's place in rural Pennsylvania near a little town called Renovo. His daughter Emma had just turned 8, so the whole family gathered for her birthday. They had one of those above-ground pools, a grill going, the usual setup. It was early June, the kind of day where the air is heavy but cools off as soon as the sun drops behind the trees. There were about 15 kids running around the yard, half of them clutching balloons. My aunt had ordered a big bunch of helium ones from the grocery store. Pink, blue, silver. The silver ones stood out because they caught the evening light. They looked like little mirrors floating on strings. At one point, right before cake, I saw Emma tugging on the string of a silver balloon. It slipped out of her hand and shot upward. She squealed and bolted after it across the yard. Everyone laughed at first, but she didn't stop when she hit the tree line. I figured she'd be back in a second, but when 2 minutes passed and there was no sign of her, the mood shifted. Her dad, Brian, called her name a few times, then jogged into the trees. Other parents followed. The kids went quiet, just staring at the woods like they expected her to pop back out. I joined the search a few minutes later. The woods behind their house weren't that dense. Old logging trails ran through them, and you could usually hear the road from deeper in. We fanned out with flashlights as the sky dimmed, calling her name. I swear we combed every inch within a mile radius. Nothing. The police came, then fire volunteers, then dogs. It stretched late into the night, then the next day, and then the next. Emma was just gone. No clothes, no balloon, no sounds of her running, like she'd been plucked out of the trees mid-step. The official search lasted about a week. After that, the volunteers stopped showing up, but her parents kept looking. I helped a few weekends, walking trails, checking sheds, even wading in the creek that wound through the valley. It all felt pointless. There were no signs of her anywhere. 3 weeks later, I was back at work when Brian called me. His voice sounded wrecked, like he hadn't slept. He told me to come over right away. When I got there, I saw it immediately. A balloon. Silver. It was lying deflated in the grass at the edge of the yard. Not ripped or popped, just empty, wrinkled, string still attached. Brian picked it up without saying anything and turned it over. That's when I saw it. Etched into the rubber, faint but deliberate, was a name. Emma. Not written with marker, not scratched with something sharp. It looked pressed into the surface, like the letters were part of the balloon itself. The edges were too clean. I thought maybe one of the neighborhood kids had pulled a prank, but Brian shook his head. He said they'd found it early that morning, right on the lawn. His wife swore she'd checked the yard before bed the night before. Nothing had been there. The balloon felt wrong in my hands, stiff, almost plasticky. The rubber should have been brittle after 3 weeks outside, but it wasn't. It was cold, even though it had been lying in the sun. Brian wanted to call the police, but his wife begged him not to. She said they'd already been treated like they were crazy once, and she couldn't handle more of it. They kept the balloon in a shoebox in the basement instead. Over the next few days, little things happened around the house. Brian told me lights would flicker for no reason. The family dog refused to go near the woods, just stood on the porch, growling. His wife said she'd wake up at night convinced someone was standing in the hallway, though no one was ever there. I stayed over one weekend to help them keep an eye on things. The second night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange sound, like static, faint but steady. I thought maybe it was the TV left on, but when I went into the living room, the screen was black. The sound was coming from downstairs. I followed it to the basement door. The static grew louder the closer I got, though nothing electronic was down there besides an old freezer. When I opened the door, the sound cut off instantly. I crept down the steps anyway. The shoebox with the balloon was on the workbench. The lid was open. The balloon lay inside, still deflated, but the letters seemed darker, almost burned into the rubber now. I swear the name looked bigger too, like the material had stretched. I shut the box and went back upstairs, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. A week later, Brian called again. His wife had thrown the balloon away, couldn't stand having it in the house anymore. He said he didn't blame her. But 2 nights after that, they found another balloon. Same silver sheen, this time tangled in the branches of the oak tree by the driveway. When they pulled it down, it had the same etched letters. Emma. They burned that one in the fire pit out back. The rubber didn't melt right. It curled and cracked, but the letters stayed visible even as the rest turned black. After that, no more balloons showed up. At least not that I know of. Brian and his wife eventually moved to a different town. They left the house empty for months before selling it. I haven't been back there since. Sometimes, though, when I'm driving at night, I catch a glint in the sky, just a scrap of reflection, like metal catching a streetlight. And for a second, it looks exactly like one of those silver balloons drifting higher and higher until it's gone. It was late July when it happened. My brother Nate had come down from Minneapolis to visit for a few days, and since we grew up out here in southern Iowa, we figured we'd take a walk through some of the old farmland we used to mess around in as kids. Most of it's been empty for years, just overgrown fields, a couple barns still standing, and long stretches of dirt road that don't see much traffic. That night was hot. Even after the sun went down, the air hung thick and the bugs were out in clouds. Around 10, we left the house and headed toward the creek that runs behind the Peterson property. Nate had a flashlight, I had a lighter and a half-crushed pack of smokes, and we just started cutting across the soybean fields like we used to when we were teenagers. We weren't really looking for anything, just walking, talking, laughing about dumb old stuff. By the time we reached the line of cottonwoods near the creek, it was close to midnight. The moon was bright enough to see without the flashlight, and it lit up the grass in that dull gray way where shadows don't look right. That's when we first heard it. Matt. It was my name, but it didn't come from Nate. It came from somewhere out in the trees. The voice was flat, almost casual, but the sound carried like it had been spoken right next to me and 30 feet away at the same time. I froze. Nate stopped too. Then we heard, Nate. Same thing. Same weird tone. We looked at each other. He flicked on the flashlight and pointed it at the tree line, but it was just the creek beyond, the water moving slow, the weeds shifting. No one there. You hear that? I asked. He nodded, frowning. Yeah, sounded like us. That was the strangest part. It didn't just sound familiar, it sounded exact, like someone had recorded our voices and played them back. We stood still for maybe a minute, waiting for it again. Nothing, just the water and the bugs. Finally, Nate killed the flashlight, and we started to walk toward the sound. Not fast, just cautious, like we didn't want to admit we were spooked. The closer we got, the stranger the air felt. Hard to explain, like walking into a basement after the dehumidifier breaks. Heavy, damp, but also charged, the way the air feels before lightning. Then it came again. Matt? This time it was behind us. We spun around, both of us breathing hard, but the fields were empty. Just rows of soybeans glowing under the moon. I remember saying, "What the hell is going on?" And my voice cracked. Nate didn't answer. He was staring at me, but not like he was scared, more like he wasn't fully there. And then he walked. Not toward me, not away, but sideways into the field. His arms were loose at his sides, like he was being guided. I grabbed him by the shirt and yanked, but his body felt stiff, heavy. He muttered something under his breath, but it wasn't words, just sounds. The light flared across the field then. Not like a beam, not like headlights. The whole soybean field just glowed pale white, every leaf lit from above. There was no shadow. My skin prickled like I was standing in front of an open oven. I remember yelling his name, but the sound got swallowed. It didn't echo, it didn't even feel like it left my mouth. The air pressed down and my head rang like I'd been too close to a fire alarm. And then, nothing. I don't remember falling. I don't remember closing my eyes. It was like a switch flipped, and the next thing I knew, it was morning. We were lying side by side in the field, dew soaking our clothes, the sun just starting to push over the horizon. My tongue felt like sandpaper, and when I sat up, my arms ached like I'd been holding them above my head all night. Nate groaned and rolled over, his face pale and sweaty. He kept asking what happened, like I'd know more than him. That's when I noticed the marks. On my left forearm, right below the elbow, there was a burn. Not like I'd touched something hot, but a clean pattern burned into the skin. 3 interlocking triangles, sharp-edged, angry red. Nate pulled up his sleeve and swore. His was different. 2 circles overlapping. Like a Venn diagram, the lines burned deep enough they looked carved. We sat there in silence for a long time, staring at them. The burns throbbed, but they didn't bleed. They weren't scabbed either. Just raw patterns in the skin. I tried to laugh it off, said maybe we brushed against some machinery or something, but there wasn't any old equipment in that field. Nothing but soybeans and dirt. Walking back was the hardest part. The farm looked the same as always. The gravel roads, the barns in the distance. But it all felt different. Like the world had shifted a little while we were gone. My watch was dead. Nate's phone battery was at 1%, even though he'd charged it before we left. When we got home, Mom was making coffee in the kitchen. She said she thought we'd come back late and crashed in the barn like we used to, because she hadn't heard us all night. She didn't notice the burns until Nate reached for a mug and his sleeve rode up. She went quiet, just stared at it, then looked at me and saw mine too. She didn't ask. She didn't want to know. The burns healed slow. Weeks. The skin never blistered, but it peeled in sheets, like a sunburn. When it was finally gone, the lines were still faintly there, paler than the rest of our skin, like scars without the raised flesh. Sometimes Nate and I talk about that night. Sometimes we don't. He swears he remembers standing in front of something tall and smooth, like a wall that stretched up forever. I don't remember that. I just remember the voices, ours, calling us into the dark. I was up at 3 in the morning because the dog wouldn't stop barking. Daisy usually only goes off when coyotes are close, but that night her bark had a different edge to it. Not frantic, not playful, just steady and sharp, like she was warning me about something she didn't understand. I threw on my boots and jacket and stepped outside. It was early September, still warm enough during the day that the nights held a sticky kind of humidity. The moon was low and thin, so the orchard should have been dark, but it wasn't. The whole place was glowing. It wasn't like floodlights or a spotlight beam. It was softer, pale white, but it lit up every single row of trees clear as day. The tops of the apple trees were bathed in it like the light was pouring straight down. I just stood there for a second, squinting, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that someone had flown a helicopter overhead, maybe spraying crops at night, though no one around here does that. I didn't hear rotors. I didn't hear anything, actually. The crickets had gone silent. Daisy had stopped barking and was crouched low, whining, her ears flat. I started walking down toward the trees. It was maybe 200 yards from the house to the first row. As I got closer, I kept expecting to see the source of the light, something above, some aircraft. But the higher I craned my neck, the harder it was to focus. My eyes watered just trying to look into it, and when I blinked away, the blur, there was nothing, just the glow washing down. At the edge of the orchard, the air felt strange. It had a static to it, like standing near a live wire. My skin prickled. I remember pressing my hand against one of the trunks, and it felt warm, almost vibrating. That's when I noticed the apples. They were trembling. Every apple on every branch, shaking like a weak earthquake, was passing through. Hundreds of them, all moving the same way, like invisible fingers, were wrapped around them. I stepped back, and the hair on my arms lifted. I thought about going back to the house, calling someone, but I didn't move. I just stood there watching. The light flared brighter for maybe 3 seconds, enough to bleach the trees into silhouettes. Then it cut out. Just like that, the orchard was dark again. The night sounds came back. Crickets, the distant coyotes, Daisy barking again like she just snapped out of something. I stayed out there until the sun came up. Didn't sleep. Didn't go back inside. I just sat on the porch, staring at the rows of trees. When morning light hit them, my stomach dropped. Not a single apple left. Every tree, every branch, clean. Not one apple on the ground either. Normally I spend weeks hauling bushels, picking carefully by hand, but it was like someone had stripped them in a single motion. Clean cuts where the stems had been. I walked all the way down the rows, checked every tree. Gone. The grass wasn't disturbed, no wheel tracks, no footprints. Just empty trees and silence. I kept thinking, maybe it was a theft. Maybe some crew came through overnight with equipment, but how? No tire ruts, no broken branches, no ladders, no bags, no nothing. And why would they leave no sign at all? By noon, I had a pounding headache. My vision kept blurring in one eye, and I felt like I'd swallowed metal. Daisy wouldn't go near the orchard. She lay under the truck and growled if I tried to pull her out. I tried calling a buddy of mine who farms peaches over in Traverse, but when I started describing it, I stopped halfway. I could tell how it sounded. Just silence on the other end. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go to bed. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, facing the window that looks out over the orchard. Around 2:30, the dog started whining again. I held her collar, trying to calm her. The orchard stayed dark, no glow this time, but I swear the trees moved. Not swaying from wind, but shifting, like the branches stretched taller all at once. It was subtle, maybe just my eyes playing tricks. I don't know, I couldn't take it anymore. Around 4 a.m., I walked the rows with a flashlight. The ground was damp from dew, but the soil was untouched. Not one sign of anyone ever stepping there. The branches were bare and stiff. When I ran my hand along them, the stems where the apples had been were sealed over, smooth as if the fruit had never grown. By the third day, the headaches eased, but I stopped checking the trees. I couldn't look at them without feeling sick. The orchard I'd worked for 20 years just erased in a single night. Neighbors asked what happened. I told them disease, blight, anything that sounded normal. Nobody questioned it too hard. But sometimes, around 3 in the morning, the dog will start that low, nervous bark again. And even if I don't look outside, I can feel it. That brightness just beyond the glass, soaking the orchard I don't dare step into anymore. I was driving back from a job in western Nebraska when it happened. It was late, close to midnight, and I'd been on the road all day. I pulled into this little town called Kimball, one of those places where the main street looks like it hasn't changed since the 70s. Just a couple gas stations, a motel, and a diner that still had its neon sign buzzing. I figured I'd eat something before finishing the drive home. The place was almost empty. There was a trucker hunched over his coffee and a woman wiping down the counter while a radio played some old country song. I sat in a booth by the window and ordered a burger and fries. Nothing fancy. The food came quick, and I was halfway through the plate when I felt this wave of exhaustion hit me. Not the usual, I've been driving too long kind of tired. This was heavier, like my body wanted to shut down right there in the booth. I shook it off, ate a few more fries, and glanced outside. My car was parked under the streetlight, exactly where I left it. Everything looked normal. I took a sip of my soda and looked back down at the plate. I remember stabbing a fry with my fork, and then, this part is hard to explain, everything just skipped, like a missing frame in a film. 1 second I was sitting there about to eat, and the next I was outside on the sidewalk, standing in front of the diner door. My car was still parked there, except the headlights were on and the engine was running. I thought maybe I'd blacked out, that maybe I'd gotten too tired and just didn't remember walking out, but the feeling wasn't right. My hands were clammy, my legs weak, like I'd just woken up from anesthesia. The air even felt different, colder, sharper. I walked up to the car, and when I opened the door, the dashboard clock read 3:14 a.m. I froze. It had been just before midnight when I sat down to eat. Somehow, 3 hours had passed. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it tight, trying to make sense of it. My phone was on the passenger seat, battery almost dead, and the time matched the car. 3 hours gone. Just like that. The first thing I thought was maybe I'd actually fallen asleep in the booth and no one bothered to wake me. I almost convinced myself of that until I glanced back at the diner through the window. My booth was empty. Not just empty, clean. The plate, the fries, the half-eaten burger, gone. Table wiped down like I'd never been there. But I remembered. I could still taste the food. I got out of the car and went back inside. The place was quiet, lights dimmed like they were getting ready to close. The trucker was gone, and the waitress was leaning against the counter with her phone. She looked up when I came in, kind of startled, like she wasn't expecting anyone else. "Kitchen's closed," she said. I glanced at the booth I'd sat in. The surface shined under the light, spotless. "I was just in here," I said, my voice coming out rough. "I had a burger, a couple hours ago." She frowned. "Honey, you must be mistaken. I've been here all night, and you definitely weren't." I didn't argue. I just stood there long enough for it to get awkward, then mumbled something and left. Back in the car, I sat with the engine idling, my hands shaking on the wheel. I kept checking the clock like maybe it would fix itself, go back to midnight. It didn't. The drive home was a blur. Every few miles I caught myself glancing at the passenger seat, expecting to see something there. I don't know what, a shadow maybe, or someone sitting quiet, but it was just empty. When I pulled into my driveway around 5, the sky was starting to lighten. I went inside and dropped on the couch, too wired to sleep. My stomach hurt, not like hunger, but like I hadn't eaten in days. I went to the kitchen, made a sandwich, but after one bite I had to spit it out. It tasted wrong, like chemicals. I didn't tell anyone the next morning. What was I supposed to say? That I'd lost 3 hours and my dinner disappeared? But later that day, when I changed my shirt, I noticed something on my forearm, a bruise, perfectly round, the size of a quarter. Dark purple, like blood pooled under the skin. I pressed it, but it didn't hurt. It looked too clean, too deliberate. By the end of the week, 2 more had shown up, one on my shoulder, one on my thigh. Same size, same shape, like someone had pressed a stamp into me. They faded after a while, but not completely. If I hold my arm under the light, I can still make out the faint outline of that first circle. I've been back to that town since then. Drove through a few months later on another job. The diner's still there, same neon sign, same parking lot. I didn't go in. I couldn't. I don't know what happened that night. All I know is I sat down to eat a burger just before midnight, and when I stood up, it was 3 hours later and my car was waiting with the engine running. And somehow, somewhere in those missing hours, something marked me. I found the Polaroid on a Wednesday morning in early spring. It wasn't in an envelope, just tucked into my mailbox between a grocery flyer and the water bill. At first I thought it was some old photo someone had dropped by mistake. It was a picture of my bedroom, taken at night from the angle of the door. I was in bed, on my side, my hair messy, blankets pulled halfway down. The timestamp at the bottom said 2:43 a.m., and standing around the bed were 3 figures. They weren't sharp in the photo. blurred, like the shutter had caught them mid-movement. Taller than me, narrow-shouldered, their faces pale ovals with no features I could make out. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if it was some prank. My first thought was that one of my friends had broken in and staged it, but the more I studied it, the more wrong it looked. The figures didn't look like people in costumes. They looked thinner, like they didn't fit the space right. I live alone. No roommates, no family in the house, just me in a small single-story place on the edge of town. I hadn't had anyone over that week. I left the Polaroid on the counter and went through my whole house, checking locks, windows, even the attic hatch. Everything was shut, no signs of anyone coming in. When my sister dropped by that afternoon, I showed her the photo. She frowned, said it looked fake. "It's Photoshop, Jamie. Someone's screwing with you." But it wasn't printed on glossy paper. It was a real Polaroid, thick and stiff, with the chemical smell still faint on the back. That night, I didn't sleep much. I left the bedroom light on and kept the TV playing low. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint clicking sound like static popping coming from the kitchen. I froze in bed, listening. After about a minute, it stopped. The next morning, another Polaroid was in my mailbox. This one was closer up, my face in bed, eyes closed, the angle looking straight down at me. No timestamp this time, just me sleeping, nothing else. I called the police after that. They sent an officer who walked through, checked the locks, made notes. He said it was probably a trespasser pulling a sick joke. He told me to install cameras and call if I saw anything again. So I bought a couple cheap Wi-Fi cameras and set them up, one in the bedroom, one covering the hallway. That night, I went to bed early, determined to catch whoever was doing it. At some point after midnight, I drifted off. I woke up around 5:30 to my alarm and immediately checked my phone feed. The cameras had both cut out at 2:41 a.m. The files for that half hour were corrupted, just static when I tried to play them, and in my mailbox, waiting, was another Polaroid. This one showed the inside of my bedroom, same as before, but the door was open wider. The three blurred figures were back. One was closer to the bed this time, its head tilted like it was looking right at me. I called the police again. Same officer came out, looked annoyed. "If there's no forced entry, there's not much we can do." I asked about the cameras cutting out, and he shrugged. "Cheap Wi-Fi cams drop all the time." I stopped mentioning the figures to him. I could tell he didn't believe me. Over the next week, more photos came. Not every night, but every few days, always around the same time. Always me in bed, sometimes with the figures there, sometimes just me alone. The strangest one was the 6th. It showed me sitting up in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the camera. I don't remember doing that. I asked my sister if she could stay over one night just to see if anything happened while someone else was in the house. She agreed, even though she thought I was overreacting. She slept on the couch, and I forced myself to try to rest in the bedroom. In the morning, there was no Polaroid in the mailbox. For the first time in over a week, nothing. But when I asked my sister how she slept, she gave me a blank look. I don't remember. I lay down, then I was waking up. She swore she didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but later that afternoon, she admitted something had felt off. She said she had this sense when she woke up that something had been reset, like she'd lost time. 2 nights later, another Polaroid showed up. This one wasn't from the angle of the bedroom door. It was from outside the house, looking in through the bedroom window. The curtains were open a crack. You could see me in bed and one of the figures standing right next to me. That night, I nailed the windows shut and pushed a dresser against the bedroom door. I didn't sleep at all. At 2:40 a.m., I felt the bed dip slightly, like someone had leaned on it. My whole body went rigid. The air felt heavy, buzzing faintly in my ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I don't know how long it lasted. At some point, the pressure lifted, and I shot upright, gasping. The clock read 3:12. The dresser was still against the door. Everything was locked. In the morning, there was no Polaroid. That was 3 months ago. I haven't found another picture since. The mailbox has been empty except for bills and junk mail. But sometimes, waking up in the dark, I get the sense that someone has just stepped back from the bed, like the air shifts, like weight leaving a mattress. And every once in a while, I'll catch myself glancing at the mailbox, half expecting to see another square of white tucked inside. It was a Tuesday morning, late November, cold enough that my breath fogged when I got to the platform. I caught the 712 into the city like I always did. The car I stepped into was maybe two-thirds full, enough people that I recognized the usual faces but still had room to spread out a little. I sat by the window on the left side, halfway down, across from a guy in a navy suit I'd seen 100 times before. He always read the paper, the actual print one, which stuck out in a car full of glowing phone screens. The train started the same as always, the usual sway, the quiet rumble underfoot. The windows were fogged at the corners, showing nothing but gray morning fields rushing by. I was scrolling news on my phone, earbuds in, just zoning out. Then, about 15 minutes in, right before we hit the stretch past the old grain silos, the train slowed. Not gradually like when we pull into a stop. This was uneven, like the brakes had been tapped, released, then tapped again. A couple people looked up. The overhead lights flickered once. Nobody said anything at first. Trains slow down sometimes, but then it didn't pick up again. We just kept crawling, too slow for the tracks we were on, with no stop in sight. That's when every single phone in the car glitched. It was almost simultaneous, screens flashing white, some showing static, some just rebooting. A weird, stuttering sound came from my earbuds, like a burst of garbled radio chatter. The guy in the suit dropped his paper and pulled his phone out like the rest of us. His froze on the lock screen, the numbers smeared and jittering like they couldn't hold still. People started murmuring. A college kid across from me smacked the side of his phone, but it stayed stuck, screen pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Then the lights overhead dimmed and stayed low, humming louder than usual. The train rolled forward a few more feet, then stopped completely. We sat there in silence for what felt like a long time. No announcement, no intercom, no conductor walking through, just the steady hum of the lights and the faint tick of cooling metal. That's when I noticed the window. It wasn't the usual blurred fields outside anymore. It looked wrong. Not dark, not light, just this flat gray haze pressed right against the glass, like fog, but thicker. You couldn't see anything through it. It wasn't condensation either. The glass was cold and dry under my palm. A woman a few rows up muttered, "What the hell?" and shifted uncomfortably. A man stood and tried to open the sliding door to the next car, but it wouldn't budge. He yanked it 3 times, hard, and it rattled but didn't open. Then the hum cut out. Total silence. My ears rang in the absence of it. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. And then, without warning, the train jolted forward again. The lights came back bright. The window view snapped back to fields rushing by, and everyone's phones lit up at once, notifications chiming in a chorus. People exhaled, muttered things like "finally" or "what was that?" I looked down at my phone and saw the time had jumped ahead by exactly 11 minutes. I didn't think much of it until I glanced back up. Several seats were empty. The woman with the red scarf who'd been 2 rows ahead, gone. The older guy with the backpack in the corner, gone. The kid who'd been smacking his phone, gone. At first I thought maybe they'd moved to another car during the stop, but then I realized no doors had opened. No one had gone anywhere. The guy in the suit across from me was frowning, looking at the empty seats too. I asked, "Weren't there more people?" He hesitated. "I thought so, yeah." But when the conductor finally came through about 10 minutes later, nobody else mentioned it. A woman behind me swore the red scarf lady had never been there at all. Another passenger insisted the corner seat had been empty since the start. I knew they were wrong. I had seen them. I could picture them clearly, the way you notice regulars after months of commuting together. By the time we reached Union Station, the car was noisy again, people back on their phones, back in their routines. I got off with the rest, walked into the morning crowd, and almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then, later that night, I checked the transit app. The 712 train didn't show any delays for that morning. No records of slowing or stopping at all. The timestamp on my phone for that gap, those missing 11 minutes, was just blank. No notifications, no logged activity. It was like the device had been off, though I knew it hadn't. And the next day, when I boarded the same train, the guy in the navy suit wasn't there. His usual seat was empty, and as far as I can tell, he's never been back. I went hiking alone in late October, which was already a stupid decision in hindsight. I'd driven out to the Catskills after work, wanting to clear my head, and I thought I'd do a short night hike with my headlamp and make it back before midnight. The air was cold, but not unbearable, clear skies, no wind. I parked at a trailhead I'd been to before, Ashokan High Point, and started up around 9 p.m. The plan was simple: hike a few miles in, stop for a snack, then head back. I had a decent flashlight, extra batteries, and my phone for GPS. I'd done night hikes before, so it didn't feel like a big risk. By the time I reached the first overlook, maybe a mile and a half up, I realized my phone's GPS wasn't loading. The blue dot just spun in place. I had signal, a couple bars, but no data. I wasn't lost yet, but I wanted to check the map since everything looked different at night. I called my friend Mason, figuring he could look up the trail map for me and give me bearings. The call connected, but instead of ringing, I just heard static. A few seconds in, through the static, a voice whispered something. It wasn't Mason's voice. It wasn't even a normal call voice. It was too quiet, like someone leaning right up against a microphone. The words came through clipped, broken, but I caught numbers. A string of coordinates, latitude and longitude, spoken slowly like they were making sure I wrote it down. Then the line went dead. I tried calling again. Same static, same whispering, the exact same numbers repeated. I hung up and tried texting Mason, but the texts wouldn't send. I copied the coordinates into my notes app so I wouldn't forget them, but I didn't recognize where they pointed. No town, no landmark came to mind, just numbers. At this point, I was unsettled but not panicking. Phones glitch, calls get crossed. That's what I told myself. I kept hiking, telling myself I'd check the coordinates when I got back to the car. The woods got darker as the moon dipped behind clouds. My headlamp was strong, but the trees pressed in tight. I don't know how to describe it other than the air felt wrong, like the silence had weight to it. Normally, you hear owls, leaves shifting, a branch cracking. That night, it was dead quiet, except for my boots crunching leaves. About 30 minutes later, I stopped to drink some water. That's when I noticed the sound. Not static this time, more like a low hum. It wasn't coming from my phone or from the trees around me. It was just everywhere. A vibration more than a sound, pressing against my chest. I stood still, trying to place it. When I pulled my phone out, the screen lit up, but the battery had drained from 70% to 19% in less than an hour. I hadn't used it except for those calls. The hum grew stronger, and I started walking faster, planning to turn around. The trail didn't look the same going back. I kept thinking I saw faint light deeper in the trees. Not white like a flashlight, but bluish, almost like a glow stick. Whenever I tried to focus on it, it would fade out. I finally decided I'd had enough. I turned back toward the trailhead. That's when my phone buzzed in my hand, new note saved. I hadn't touched anything. The screen lit, and there were the coordinates again, copied neatly into my notes app with the exact time stamped. The hum spiked, so loud I dropped the phone. My headlamp flickered and went out for a few seconds before sputtering back on. The trail ahead of me was empty, but I swear I saw a figure just off to the side, tall, pale, barely there in the beam before vanishing. I ran. I didn't care if I twisted an ankle. I just wanted out. My memory of what happened next isn't clean. I remember running, then the hum collapsing into silence like it cut out mid-sound. The next clear memory I have is waking up lying on my back in the middle of the trail. My flashlight was beside me, turned off. My phone was in my pocket, completely powered down. My watch said 3:17 a.m. I had no memory of the last few hours. No idea how I'd ended up lying there. My legs were sore like I'd been walking for miles, but I was in the same section of trail I'd been on earlier. When I turned my phone back on, the battery was back at 68%, exactly where it had been when I first noticed it dropping. Everything looked normal except for the notes app. The coordinates were still there. 2 separate entries, one at 9:48 p.m., the other at 12:12 a.m. I walked back down to the car without stopping. The forest was quiet again, just regular night sounds. No hum, no lights, no whispering. When I finally looked up the coordinates at home, they didn't point anywhere I recognized. A patch of woods miles away from the trail I was on. No houses, no roads. Just forest. I've never gone back. I pulled into the motel just after 10 at night. I'd been driving west all day, cutting across Kansas, and I was too tired to push any farther. The place was called Prairie View Lodge, though there wasn't much of a view, just a gravel lot, a row of rooms with faded numbers, and a buzzing neon sign that flickered vacancy in uneven bursts. The lot looked packed. Every space was taken, trucks and sedans lined up bumper to bumper. But when I walked into the office, the lobby was empty. No sound, no clerk, just the faint hum of the soda machine in the corner. I stood there for maybe a minute before a door behind the counter creaked open and a man stepped out. He looked normal enough, maybe mid-50s, gray hair, plaid shirt tucked into jeans. He didn't say much, just asked how many nights, slid me a key and pointed toward room 12. No mention of breakfast, no Wi-Fi code, nothing. The whole check-in lasted under a minute. Room 12 was at the far end, ground floor. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first. Cleaner, heavy on bleach. The bed was made, the carpet threadbare, the kind of generic art print you see in every cheap motel. The blinds were already drawn tight. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and sat down on the bed. That's when I noticed it. No sound outside. With a lot that full, I expected doors slamming, voices, TVs bleeding through thin walls, but it was silent. I peeked out the window between the blinds. The lot was still full, every car exactly where I'd seen it, but no people, no movement, no curtains shifting in any of the other rooms, just parked cars under the orange glow of the lot lights. I told myself maybe everyone had checked in earlier and was already asleep. That was the simplest answer. I brushed my teeth, got under the covers, and tried to sleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound. Not loud, more like a murmur. I lay there, trying to figure out where it was coming from. At first, I thought it was the TV in the next room, but when I pressed my ear to the wall, I realized it wasn't a show. It was voices, dozens of them. Low, muffled, like a crowd talking in another room. I strained to catch a word or two, but it all blurred together. Male, female, old, young, it was impossible to tell. The weird part was the rhythm. The voices didn't overlap like a real crowd. They rose and fell together, almost timed. I knocked lightly on the wall, half expecting whoever it was to quiet down. The voices didn't falter. They just kept going, perfectly steady. That's when I caught it. My own name. Not once, not twice, over and over. My name threaded through the murmur, repeated in the same tone at the same pace. I froze. I hadn't told anyone my name except the guy at the desk. There was no reason the people in the next room should know it. I whispered, "Hello?" Before I could stop myself, the voices stopped, dead silent. I backed away from the wall and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. I thought about leaving right then, but my car was parked around the side, and I'd have to step out into that silent lot to get to it. After maybe 10 minutes of silence, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd dreamed half of it. I lay back down and pulled the blanket tight. Then, around 3 a.m., it started again. Louder this time. The same chorus of voices muffled through the walls, all saying my name. Not shouting, not whispering, just speaking in unison, steady and calm. I sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't coming from one side anymore, it was both walls, left and right. I covered my ears with my hands. Even then, I could feel it in my chest. The cadence was exact, like a recording played back on loop. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone. No signal, not a single bar. The screen brightness dimmed on its own, flickering before going black. When I tried to power it back on, it wouldn't respond. The voices grew sharper, not angry, not frantic, just clearer, like they'd moved closer to the walls. I thought I heard them from above too, pressed down through the ceiling. Then the lights in the room flickered. Once, twice, then out. I sat in total darkness. The voices didn't stop. They filled every corner, the exact same word, my name, over and over. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt stretched, wrong. My head pounded and the air felt heavy, almost charged, like the moment before lightning hits. At some point, I blacked out. When I came to, the room was bright with daylight. The TV was on, playing some local morning news. My phone was back on the nightstand, fully charged, even though I hadn't plugged it in. I opened the blinds. The lot was nearly empty. Just 3 cars left, scattered. not the dozen or more I'd seen the night before. I packed my bag fast. When I stepped outside, the air was still, no breeze at all. The office door was locked, blinds pulled, no one inside. I didn't bother checking out. I threw my stuff in the car and drove straight out of that lot without looking back. That was last year. I still have the motel key tucked in a drawer. Room 12. The plastic tag is cracked down the middle, like it had been bent in half. I don't remember doing that. The night the voice came through, I was mid-cup of stale coffee and halfway through a song I didn't care about. My show, late night, small town, the kind where you hear more frogs than callers, was routine. Pull the playlist, wander the board, read the odd email that made it past the spam filter. I liked the stupid safety of it. The studio lights were on dim, the street outside was a black smear, and the building's heat kicked in and out like a tired animal. I cut the track to commercial because I had a voicemail to play. It was one of those late night things, someone sobbing about a breakup at 2 in the morning, and the town's one DJ's small mercy was to let them hear themselves on the radio. My engineer, Malik, had already buzzed me with the pre-roll from the production room. We ran a minute of ads, the standard loop, support your local diner, mention the sponsor, and then the headphones hugged my skull like a warm, hollow thing. That's when it started. At first I thought it was the station console mixing a dud audio file into the chain. A thin warble under the spot ads like someone had left a reel spinning with a finger on the tape. Then the warble resolved, impossibly, into a voice. It said my name, not a casual mention. My name, my own voice saying it in that exact way I say it when I catch myself on recordings, the lilt I don't like. Distorted like I was hearing it through a glass tube, but fast, urgent. Marty, let me out, it said, or rather rasped, because it didn't sound like a request so much as a plea that had been replayed 1,000 times and lost its edges. The timbre was mine. My brain did its stupid protective thing and tried to point at echoes, rehearsal, prank, audio bleed, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and didn't sit back down. I yanked the headphones off. Malik's door was open. He was hunched over a laptop, adjusting levels. The studio smelled like cigarette smoke and paper, the radio equivalent of an old shirt. You catch that? I asked him, voice too loud in the quiet. He looked up like he'd been dragged out of deep water. I heard static. Sounded like a generator. He shrugged and went back to whatever he was doing. The board's meters were normal. The log showed the commercial break played at 2:03 a.m. like it always had. I played the last 30 seconds from the board recorder. Clean. Nothing but the canned, "This hour is brought to you by," and the jingle. I checked the stream monitor for backfeed. 0. The web client showed listeners dropping and coming back like they were skittering around a puddle, normal numbers for a Tuesday night, and there was no spike of a call-in, no message, nothing on the traffic reports. Still, it had happened. My voice had appeared in my headphones asking to be let out. I kept saying it to myself in the fluorescent that hummed over the console, thinking that if I said it enough, it would sound normal. You heard it too, right? Malik asked finally, half joking, half trying to test me. He'd heard nothing but my voice sideways. I rewound the machine again. The studio recorder, the raw 2-track, the stream log, none of them contained the pleading. Malik pointed out, patiently, almost gently, that sometimes our ears hear what our heads want to hear at 2 in the morning. I should get some sleep. I drove home in a thin rain, the road silvered. The town looked like it had been painted back together with a small, careful brush. I left the station lights behind and thought about the voice only when the intersections came up. I went to bed like you do when you need to go somewhere in the morning. Alarm set, coffee grinder slightly smug in the kitchen, the weight of things dulled. I fell into a sleep that was too heavy to be honest. At 8, over a burnt cup, Malik texted, "Did you find anything on the backup?" I called him and we compared notes. He'd checked the patch logs and the circuit diagrams. No anomalies. If it was recorded on the board and not on the stream, we'd see phase shift, he told me, words I liked because they were precise. We both went quiet, the kind of quiet a tool chest takes when it can't help. The day was routine. The grocery ads, the emergency notice about the river, the school cancellations because of the storm forecast. And at 3 that afternoon, a woman I didn't recognize called the station. She called for me by name and said she'd been at the edge of the quarry last night and thought she'd seen a light like a star too close. She told me it felt like someone watching from behind glass. Her voice went thin and shook. She wanted me to play an old Stones track for the rest of my shift, as if it would patch the night. I wrote down the time she'd seen the light because notes are how we make storms manageable. That evening, I set up a second microphone and left it rolling on the kitchen table. If an echo was going to loop back into my headphones in the middle of a commercial, maybe I could catch it and prove I wasn't falling apart. Mullick dropped by just to watch the setup and to laugh like old friends do at silly professional neuroses. We stood with 2 cups of bad coffee, listening to the hum of the house and the rain on the roof. Around midnight, I went to the studio alone. I put the headphones on deliberately, stared at the meters, and played the last commercial spot live. No voice, no whisper. But when I paused the playback and held the headphones near the desk mic, absurd, but if there was a phase ghost in the room, we'd catch it. The breath in my ear was exactly as it had been the week before, shallow, primed. It wasn't sound so much as presence. I took my palm off the slider and the control logic in the board pinged. I slept badly. Twice during the night, I'd wake with a start and check the kitchen mic file. Nothing unusual. The file showed me walking through the house, tea kettle on, the proper creaks and stretches. No begging. The only oddity was the tiniest blip in the waveform at 2:12 a.m. Half a millisecond of negative space like a seam in the air. You learn to live with seams if you work nights. They're part of the job. Static that comes and goes, a caller who's drunk by 3, a tape that eats itself. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself the voice had been my own reflection off the console, some feedback artifact. I told myself anything that kept me from thinking about how exact the timbre had been. A week later, the old woman from the quarry called back. She said she heard something while walking her dog at the edge of the water. A voice, a wheeze, like a radio left on and tuned too sharp. And then she said my name. She asked if I'd ever felt time slip, like you blinked and the world had repositioned itself on purpose. I said no because I wanted to be polite and because yes would open a conversation I didn't want to have. That small talk is how the impossible breathes into ordinary things. It didn't help that I started waking with a scent in my nose I couldn't identify. Dry metal like a coin left in the sun. It did not fade fast. Malik joked I was being haunted by sponsorships. I laughed, but the laugh had paper edges. On a Tuesday, the board did something stupid. The automation dropped out for 2 minutes in the middle of a noon hour. Our emergency feed cut to dead air and then to our sign-off tone. The monitor recorded nothing but a low, flat tone in the space where a voice should have been. We were lucky. No one called in and the afternoon crowd filed like they do, indifferent and sticky. But on playback, when I scrubbed the file, there was a clear, clean waveform at 2:12 a.m. on the kitchen mic. A distinct human pattern that looked like a breath trying to form words. The shape matched my voice exactly. We bottled it. Malik rendered the clip and saved it in 3 places, his hands shaking. We sent it to a friend at the university's audio lab, more to humor our own panic than because we believed anything could be done. The lab guy called back with the kind of careful language that's meant to soothe and doesn't. No distortion artifacts consistent with studio gear, no digital signature that matched a known compression profile. It was, he said, present in the samples, but only in that one mic in one night. And when he asked if he could hear it, his voice had that same professional gap. Play it carefully, he said. We played it. Nothing. The file had no voice. It was paper silent, where a desperate voice had been. A thing exists and does not exist at once. I read about that in old science fiction and in repair manuals about vacuum tubes. I lived it in the small hour when the board was quiet and my laptop's clock read 2:12. I found a mark on my forearm about 2 days after. A thin, pale line, like a fingernail had been dragged, and then the skin somehow healed around the shape. Malik scratched his head when I showed it to him. Stress, he said, because people need names for things. I didn't want to lie and say I'd scratched it myself. The station continued. Callers called. Trucks passed the lot and breathed diesel into the night. I slept more badly and then less, the way you get used to a pain so it becomes part of the furniture. A month later, I went out to the quarry with the woman who'd called. She pointed to a shallow dip in the rock like a bowl. "It feels wrong there," she said, "like it's looking." I stood there with my hands in my pockets and tried to be a man who belongs in daylight. The wind smelled like rain and pennies. Behind us in the town, the radio station hummed on, and the little ads for hair salons and pizza printed themselves into people's commutes. I drove home after, and when I unclipped my headphones in the quiet of my kitchen, my reflection looked like a thing that had listened too long. People still called the show. They still asked for songs for broken hearts or lost dogs. I played them because the work was honest, and there's safety in honesty. Sometimes in my headphones, at 2:12 in the morning, I would catch myself saying my own name in the shower steam and wonder whether a voice asks to be let out because it wants to be somewhere else or because it has been somewhere and does not want to be left there. I kept the clip on a drive I never opened and never deleted. I held the silence like a thing you might find in your pocket, small, sharp, possibly useful later. The compost of late-night radio kept doing its strange, ordinary work. Songs, ads, the weather, the occasional human confession. The voice stayed in the room only for the nights it wanted to be heard and then unmade itself when anyone tried to point a machine at it. I told my wife, eventually, with the light on and the kettle at the boil, because truth is a poor stew if you feed it secrecy. She listened and touched the pale mark on my arm like you test fruit for ripeness. "Maybe someone is stuck," she said finally, the kind of sentence that's not an answer but also not nothing. I don't know if anyone was. I don't know where you let a voice out that sounds exactly like you, or why sometimes the world keeps the proof and sometimes it pretends nothing happened at all. I only know the board logs and the lab reports and the silence and a small line of healed skin that looks like a listening device left very briefly against my wrist. I opened the back door to the rental cabin, and there it was on the kitchen table. A cheap, gray, disposable camera, like someone had dropped off an extra trashy souvenir and forgotten it. It was the kind of thing you expect behind a curtain of brochures, not on the counter of the place you were going to sleep. Sarah nudged it with her finger and said, "Wonder whose that is?" And I shrugged and put it in my bag. We'd driven out to the Cape for the weekend because the city felt too loud and both of us needed to unwind. The cabin sat on a small bluff above the surf, weathered shingles and a porch that sagged a little on the right. The fog rolled in off the water that first night, slow and hungry, pressing the sound of the ocean down into a distant, even breath. It smelled like salt and wet rope. The place was empty except for us. The rental agency had only taken our names and a card for the lockbox, and the old-fashioned dusk felt like a pause button. We made a quick dinner, drank too much wine, and fell into easy, stupid jokes about going to bed early. When the wind picked up around 2 in the morning, it woke me. I lay there for a moment, listened to the noise of shingles complaining, and then dozed off again. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Sarah was already awake, sitting at the window, a fellow just a French painter, rubbing her arms against the chill. She had the camera in her hands, and a grin that meant she'd found something odd, the good kind of weird that makes vacations memorable. "I developed it last night," she said before I had my shoes on. "Someone at the shop said they had time. They had a little scanner and were curious." She spread the prints on the table like a deck of cards. Most were ordinary. Children on a beach, the same porch lit golden under a different sky, a dog shaking off water, tourist stuff. We laughed at one of ourselves, a goofy selfie taken before the store developed the roll. But then Sarah flipped another picture over and handed it to me. It was the bedroom. Not a staged photo, grainy, slightly overexposed at the edges from a cheap flash. The bed was there, the quilt a little bunched where we'd lain, and we were both in it, tangled under the covers. I was on my right side, face to the pillow. Sarah was on her back, thumb half in her mouth like she sometimes did when she slept badly. The time stamp the shop stamped on the corner said 2:13 a.m. "I don't remember you taking any photos last night," I said, voice too loud. I thought maybe I'd been drunk or hyper, or that I had leaned over and snapped something without remembering. But Sarah's face had gone flat. Neither do I, she said, and I never leave the camera out here. We held the picture together like you hold a match. The kitchen light hummed, the fog pressed at the windows. We went back through the evening in little clumsy loops. After dinner, we walked the path down toward the cove because the fog made everything look like a photograph. We came back and watched a movie, the kind that disappears into the background. We drank wine, and I remember saying something about the sea sounding like a train in the distance. At some point, I must have gone to the bathroom. At some point, we turned off the lamp and slid under the covers. That was all there was. There was no memory of a camera clicking or of standing to take a picture of the bed we were in. Sarah whispered, "Maybe it belonged to someone who stayed here before us." It made sense in a surface way. People leave things behind. But the prints continued. There was a second one. A close-up, grainier, taken from the foot of the bed. The flash caught the curve of my shoulder and the edge of the mattress. Sarah's cheekbones were like islands in light. There was no timestamp on that one, just the grain and the smear of something like condensation on the lens. The third photo made both of us go quiet. It was the same bed, same angle, but someone, or something, stood at the right-hand side of the frame. Not a full body, nothing that hung where a human body would hang. A column of darker gray, like someone out of focus who had been lit from behind. The flash had caught the suggestion of a shoulder and the barest outline where a head might be. The way our limbs lay beneath the covers, the way the air in the photograph seemed to bend around that shape, made my throat constrict. I flipped the print to the back. There was no handwriting, no name, just the shop's little stamp and a number. We checked the locks. Every window latched. The deadbolt turned smooth. The porch door had a scuff I hadn't noticed before, as if someone had leaned against it and left a smudge with the heel of a hand. The stairs down to the beach showed nothing in the fog, only a track of our own footprints that ended at the dune grass and then disappeared where the wet sand met the shore. I drove into town to ask at the place that developed the roll. The guy behind the counter looked like he had worked the late shift for too many years. He ran his fingers through his hair as he told me the camera had been dropped off by a woman around 6 in the morning, soaking wet, hat clutched in both hands. She said she was staying at the Blue Gull, he said. Said she didn't want the film left there, but asked if we could hurry. Left $5 on the counter, and that was it. When I asked if he remembered what the woman looked like, he shrugged. Rain makes people all kind of the same to me, he said. Sorry. On our last night, the wind eased to a polite breeze, and the fog stood off like a quiet audience. We decided to sleep with the television on in the living room for company, because the house felt too loud when it was just us. We set the camera on the table not far from the couch, both of us trying to act unconcerned. The TV muttered a cooking show in the background, and the kettle ticked on the counter. Around 1 in the morning, Sarah nudged me awake and said she'd heard something, a soft metallic sound like a zipper from the other room. I went to look and found nothing. The camera lay where we'd left it, an ordinary little plastic object that took ordinary little pictures. We woke up early and left the cabin as if we could remove whatever humidity had soaked into us. We drove back slowly, not because the roads were bad, but because neither of us wanted to rush into the city where lights and people and schedules might make the weekend trivial. The camera sat in the glove compartment like a guilty third person. 2 days later, the prints in my kitchen lived in a stack like other small things that demand thought. I kept the one with the figure in a frame, even though I told myself not to, even though it made the house feel colder. Friends asked why I sounded flat the next week. Sarah said she felt wrong for a while, like someone had pressed a palm into her chest and left a print. She found a faint bruise on her shoulder the morning after we left, a pale crescent like the mark you get when you bump the corner of a cabinet, but we had no scuff on the quilt that matched it, no heavens of broken wood to point to. It faded in a few days like a small, unacknowledged injury. We tried to be practical. We checked the booking logs with the rental agency. They'd rented to a single woman a month earlier, no names and a credit card, the same way vacation places do business. The owner told us over the phone that people left cameras behind sometimes, and that the house cleaner probably found one in a drawer and popped it on the table. He did not know if anyone had complained about pictures. He did say, "Old houses have their ways," which was his polite way of walking away. That's the part that's the worst to explain, how ordinary the rest of life goes. Work emails, grocery lists, the stray text from Sarah at lunch about a meeting that went long. We stopped bringing the photo up unless we were alone. It sat on the shelf like a question with no punctuation. Once, weeks later, I dreamed I was back in that bedroom and the fog was inside the house, pressing the curtains flat against the glass. In the dream, Sarah woke and smiled like she had in the picture, thumb in her mouth, and when I reached for her, there was a hand already on the pillow beside her, pale and too still. We kept the prints. I don't know why. Maybe because throwing them away felt like admitting there'd never been anything at all. Maybe because admitting you were looked at while you slept feels, in some private way, worse than the unknown. We did not go back to that cabin. We stayed away from foggy nights and cheap cameras that someone else might have left on a table. Sometimes, walking past the bedroom mirror at night, I look at the shape of the room behind me and the way shadows pool near the corners. Sometimes I wonder whether the person who dropped the camera off in the shop knew she needed the pictures developed quickly. If she came back to check them, what did she see and what did she take away? I have a photo in a frame on the bookshelf. When I pass it, I look for movement in the gray where the figure stands. It never moves, it never goes away. It waits like a question, quiet and patient. I hit the interstate after dark because the forecast said the fog would lift, and I wanted to get as far as I could before morning. I-80 between Cheyenne and Laramie is straight and dull, which is why I took it. Less chance for idiots, fewer trucks weaving. I was fighting sleep by humming along to the oldies station and watching the road mark lines slide under the headlights. A little past midnight, the radio started cutting in and out. Not the usual skip when a tower fades. This was a low, mechanical warble that swallowed the music for half a beat, then let it come back. I thumbed the dial. Every frequency I skimmed had that same thin static under it, like someone had tuned a ham radio in the back of the band. It was unnerving, but not unknown. I figured a storm cell up ahead was screwing with receivers. Then I saw the first car on the shoulder. A faded blue Corolla. Brake lights on, engine idling. A hunched figure behind the wheel. At first I thought he was asleep, the way people nod off in long runs. He sat too straight for sleep, head fixed forward. I slowed, moved over, and saw his hands on the wheel, pale in the streetlight. No movement, no breath I could see. His chest wasn't rising. I upshifted and kept going, thinking maybe he'd had a medical emergency. A mile on, another car pulled over. This one a black SUV, hazard lights on. Another driver sitting absolutely still, staring straight ahead. Then a pickup, then two more sedans, all along the shoulder like a line of parked cars waiting for a show. Engines humming. No hazard triangles, no phone calls, no waving. I eased past each one like I was in a funeral procession, half expecting someone to run out waving arms, but nobody moved. The fog had a way of swallowing sound. It muffled horns, footsteps, even the low vibration of idling engines beyond a certain distance. I couldn't tell if the silence was a trick or if it had been made that way on purpose. My phone buzzed in my pocket, one bar and a text from Jenna. "You okay doing that drive alone?" I thumbed back a, "Yeah, fine." Then the phone went dark, like someone had pressed the off switch. No lock screen, no dim glow. Dead. Battery had been above 50% when I left. By the time I reached the overpass near mile marker 219, there were clusters of cars pulled over that I'd missed earlier. Doors closed, windows fogged, their lights painting the shoulder orange. I rolled down my window and leaned out because I felt like I had to check, like there was some explanation that wouldn't be messed by the imagination. The air outside tasted like metal and rain, but there wasn't any rain. It was a scent I didn't have words for. Hot wiring and ozone and the faint, cleaner smell of a hospital hallway. I saw faces then, sharper. Young, old, men in uniforms, a woman with a child's backpack in her lap. All of them motionless. Some heads tilted as if they were listening to something only they could hear. None of them turned toward me. None of them acknowledged the flashlight beam I trained across the lot. For a second, I thought one of them blinked, then realized my own eyes had dried. I blinked again, and the moment was gone. I pulled into the nearest rest area and killed the engine, feeling suddenly like I shouldn't be moving at all. The rest area was lit, but empty. Picnic tables and vending machines like props. The hum of the interstate was distant. I walked up to the closed restroom door and pressed my ear to it. Nothing, not even the soft thrum of plumbing. My watch said 12:37. I had no sense of how long I'd been driving. I knelt and checked tires because doing something with my hands made the scene less like a dream. When I straightened, my odometer caught my eye. It read 137,982. I stared at it because it was the sort of number you only notice when it's round. I wrote it down on the back of an old receipt from the glove box because my phone was useless. The ink felt ridiculous, urgent. I got back in, pulled onto the highway, and my headlights caught a mirage of motion ahead. More cars on the shoulder, engine lights glowing. As I passed them, a soft chorus of static rose up from the radio. It resolved briefly into a syllable, half a whisper like a throat clearing. My name? Maybe. The sound would have been easy to mistake for an electronic hiccup. I told myself to calm down and keep driving. At mile marker 238, I blinked. Not in that I closed my eyes for a second way. Everything just snapped. The sensation was a little like hitting a pothole in the mind. I felt the car shudder, the blood move in my temples, and then a cold clarity filled my head. I opened my eyes, and there was nothing on the shoulder. No cars, no people, only the steady, indifferent line of the interstate and the fields beyond. The fog had thinned to mist. The radio tuned itself to static and then to silence. I looked down. The odometer read 138,062. My body reacted before my brain could make the numbers add up. That was an 80-mile jump. I must have dozed and driven, I told myself. Maybe I'd hit the cruise and slept, miles stacking without my awareness. But my watch still said 12:42, only 5 minutes after the rest area check. My phone stayed dead. I could feel the skin on my forearms prickling, like after a long night under sun lamps. And when I flexed my fingers, there was a faint buzzing under the skin that matched the tone I'd heard on the radio. I pulled over into a turnout and sat with the engine off because moving felt like collusion. The interstate was empty the way a stage is empty between shows. No other headlights, no parked cars. I walked along the shoulder and scuffed at the gravel. No skid marks, no footprints, just my own breath steaming in the air. The grass was damp but untrampled. I called into the night, my sister first, then my boss. Long, clumsy messages. Both called back eventually. Jenna's voice had sleep at the edges. "You okay? You sound weird," she said. I told myself to give rational answers. I told her I'd had a weird fog and some cars on the shoulder. She told me to go home. I hung up and felt like a child who'd been told not to say anything weird because adults wouldn't like it. On the drive the rest of the way, nothing dramatic happened. The highway stretched, dark and ordinary. I kept checking the odometer like a miser counting coins. It climbed in the natural way, not in leaps. When I pulled into my driveway, the sky was beginning to bleach at the edges. The air cooler now. The house looked right in the way a house should. Inside, the kettle was still where I'd left it, the couch where my jacket had fallen when I'd last been home a week earlier. My keys had been set down in the bowl by the door. I sat on the couch and tried to remember the last 80 miles. There was a hole where memory should be, soft and squeezable, like pressing a thumb into wet sand and feeling nothing beneath. Pieces tried to surface. White light on the shoulder, the distant chorus of engines, a metallic tang at the back of my throat, but they refused to arrange themselves into a coherent sentence. Over the next few days, I checked little things. Gas receipts, timestamps on the app where I sometimes logged mileage, surveillance footage from the warehouse where I run my small delivery line. The warehouse cam had a blank spot in its recording for the night I drove through. The file corrupted, beginning and ending with a blue screen. The app logged a single trip with impossible timestamps. Start 12:36 a.m., end 12:37 a.m., distance 79.9 miles. Whoever set the app's parameters to allow that sort of patching knew how to make numbers lie. I had a mark on my wrist, a pale oval like someone had pressed a coin there. It didn't hurt and it faded in a week, but I could see it in the mirror every morning and remember how out of place it felt, as if my skin had been used as a napkin and left embarrassed. People asked if I'd been drinking. They asked if I was on meds. I answered the questions because they're sheltering words, but none of them fit. You can say blackout, and people nod and let you off the hook, but a blackout usually takes hours and causes a tangle that's messy to explain. This wasn't messy. It was a clean absent, like someone had cut a circle from the night and slipped it into their pocket. I drove the route again a week later in daylight just to see the shoulders. Parked cars, friends, family, nothing out of order. I stopped at the same rest area, checked my odometer at the exact same mile marker, and wrote that number down on a paper I kept in the glove box. 137,982. Same as before. I couldn't make sense of what had happened, and everything I checked either contradicted itself or refused to say anything at all. The one thing that kept nagging at me was that the drivers on the shoulder hadn't been asleep or dead. They had an intent to them, like people listening hard to a voice only they knew. In the days after, I would wake for no reason between 2 and 3 in the morning and sit up listening, half expecting to hear that toneless chorus again. Sometimes, in the silence, my ears would pick up a distant buzz, the same thin warble the radio had made the night I drove, and I would sit there counting the seconds between breath and breath, like a man counting heartbeats. No lights in the yard at 3 a.m., no missing hours since then. I went back to work, to deliveries and invoices and the small, real worries of the day. It was the only way not to think about the empty shoulder, and the people who sat there, engines running and hands on their wheels, listening to something I could not hear. I left the pickup at first light and walked into a world that looked like all the maps I'd ever owned. White, neat, with every detail lying down to rest. It had snowed hard the night before, heavy wet flakes that packed around the trunks and smothered the old logging ruts. My breath steamed in clouds. I should have taken the trails, but I wanted quiet, and the fields off Harlan's place had been cleared last fall, so you could move through there without crunching cedar. I strapped my snowshoes on over my boots, hoisted the rifle, and pushed into the stand of pines. There was nothing at first. The way that happens on good mornings, the air was intact, so full of cold that a sound had to be sharp to cut it. I scanned the ground between the trunks because that stretch of ridge had deer in it every winter. Tracks, droppings, a scratched patch where they'd bed down. I found the first sign about a quarter-mile in, a trail of prints, not human, three-toed and light. I crouched to check. Not coyote, not fox. I'd seen animals like that only once last spring when a neighbor told me he'd seen something weird at dusk. Smaller than a deer, tracks like someone had taken a knife to a rabbit and made the feet longer. I followed the prints because curiosity is the other kind of hunger. The trail curved under an overhang of low limbs and came out into a clearing I didn't know by name. The snow there had an ordered look, like someone had raked it. The prints danced in a spiral, round and tight, every turn deliberate as if an animal had been walking a circle and getting closer with each step. I frowned. Animals root and range. They don't follow geometry. Even a fox runs straight and messy. The spiral went on for maybe 20 yards. It tightened until the prints were almost on top of each other. The three-toed tracks crossed over themselves like a comet tail. The center of the spiral was a little bowl of snow, and in that bowl something upright stood. My boots. They weren't planted like someone had set them there to dry. They stood perfectly vertical, shafts spooning snow inside, laces tucked in tight. The pair was the exact model I'd left in the cab. Old leather, tongues worn flat, a ragged cuff where a scrap of wire had pinched them last season. There was a patch of old black paint on the left heel from fixing the gate on Harlan's farm. Only I had that mark. I knew those boots. I'd slippersed into them for the drive before I put the snowshoes on. I don't remember laughing. I remember my throat closing. There was nothing else in the clearing. No pack by a tree, no footprints except that spiral. No sign of anyone who could have walked there and left the boots standing. The snow around them was torn up by the spiral, but otherwise perfect. I knelt and ran my glove along the leather. The boots were cold to the touch, outer welt crabbed with frost that smelled like the truck cab, like the cigarette I don't smoke anymore. I called out to break the stupid hush. "Hello?" My voice made a brittle sound and left the trees like a thrown stone. Nothing answered but the steady whump of a chickadee in the next stand. I imagined. Ridiculous. So stupid that someone else had been out here early, a prank between hunters. Maybe Harlan or Pete or some kid. But who would set a man's boots upright in the snow and make a spiral with animal tracks around them? Who would know the black paint on my heel? I thought of the truck. I thought of sleeping in the cab if I'd been tired and how I might have gone out and misplaced them. Maybe I'd left them pulled from the cab and no,